All right, everybody, welcome to Everything Else with Jay and Friends. I am here again with Doze. This is our second official episode over on this platform and first one, uh, on specifically this project, which is, hang on, sorry, I got background noise. All right, there we go. Too many windows open. Um, all right, so specifically, we're doing a project called Album Dialectics, which, I think the idea was to have rap albums as vehicles to be able to talk about what was going on in the periods that produced these albums, right? And we decided to start with the first Run-DMC album. First of all, Jared, welcome, man. Everybody knows, Jared. I mix what I like. I should have left you off stage and then brought you up, but I brought us all up at once. So um, I mix what I like, Black Liberation Media. I mix what I like, Mixtape Manifesto, which is over my shoulder here, which is very relevant to the conversation that we're going to have today. Also, really appreciated your work, Jared, around the 50th anniversary, which was something that honestly I did not want to engage with at all, because it just was such a, you know, just kind of a shit show, in terms of what I felt like I appreciate or enjoyed about hip hop growing up. And so, anyways, back to the concept of this series a little bit. We wanted to use albums because this is the thing, is most people know hip hop as just music at this point, right? They don't even think about it as a culture. They wouldn't be able to name like what are the four elements, or some say five now. Don't have a great grasp of the socio-political cultural context in which it started out. And so this particular album comes out in 1984, and the first single comes out in 83. And it's not the beginning, but I think that it gives a good vehicle to kind of talk about the beginning, both in terms of what it's doing and how it kind of paints itself in certain ways as kind of an authentic representation that maybe is different from some of the ways that hip hop is marketed or produced in the early years, with primarily through Sugar Hill Records. Um, and also to talk about questions of co-optation and ownership and, infusion of capital and specific figures, particularly Russell Simmons, which is going to be really, not somebody that anybody necessarily really wants to talk about, but at the same time, you really can't talk about this era, or even the 80s and 90s in general within hip hop, and not talk about Russell Simmons because of the outsized role he has in the development of this, from party music to to marketable albums and artists, right? And obviously, specifically for people who don't know, he's the brother of Joseph Simmons, who is from Run DMC, and Run DMC doesn't happen probably without Russell Simmons. And so, yeah, I just start there. But let me see, what is it? The first thing I think we had was kind of like just our own recollections of this music growing up, this specific album. And I think that what I would say for me is, Mark and I are a little bit younger, and so the 90s really was, and you know context and place is really important for this. I grew up in Southern Oregon, and so we didn't have commercial rap radio, which doesn't really get going anyway until later on, from this period. um and Beyond that, like, so introduction to rap in that space would be very popular songs. And then when MTV becomes a vehicle, then that becomes one. But so I obviously heard this album later on, in the mid 90s. And yeah, I mean, I loved it. I still love the music, honestly, on this album. Um and but yeah, I mean, that's the context in which I heard it. And then of course it was also during a period I think Mark and I both went through, which is like as you get more into listening to hip hop, you feel this need to fill in all the gaps of your knowledge historically of around origins and important artists and influences and things like this. And that's I don't know whether kids have that as much today. I'm not sure, because I think the era that we encountered rap music, it was so the artists are coming up and it was like, well, who influenced you? And they would be like, well, Run-DMC, or whatever. And so it was something that you just kind of had to do. And then obviously as you do it, you're like, oh, like that's where that rhyme that so and so says, on the intro to this comes from, or, this is where that sample, that I hear a DJ scratching in comes from, or whatever. And so it then gives you a little bit of a better understanding of the importance and things like that. But and then obviously this group was really lionized also by like MTV and VH1. And I think that's a part of this story as well, which so when countering the music through those art forms, they always reference back to Rockbox as like one of the first videos that they would play on MTV, and things like that. So that was my kind of origin with it. Yeah, Doze, why don't you go next, and then we'll let
Yeah,
Jared play cleanup.
yeah, sure. Um, yeah, similar. I mean, I grew up, in the Boston area, so we did have sort of some of this kind of mainstream radio pieces. I benefited from having an older sister and an older brother, um, who, I was late 80s. I remember kind of hearing some of these things as, little young pup, and just wanted they my they would do like dance routines or whatever, and it would just be like, oh, I want to be involved in some of that. And so, obviously the mainstream stuff with with Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson at that time, seeing those kind of videos, I remember. And then just sort of as they evolved their taste, it's just how I got introduced to a lot of that, of a lot of early hip hop for me. And then, like you're saying, Jared, I get to the early 90s, mid 90s, where I'm really starting to like, oh, this is what I really like to listen to or enjoy. And I just remember hearing scratches and the whole DJ culture side of it. And that's what kind of hooked me into a lot of this stuff. And so, yeah, similarly, like you're saying, someone would say, well, Run-DMC was this sort of seminal group for that, like incorporation of it. Um, and so that's where it led back to, oh, let me go and re-listen to some of these things. And of course, as I got older and watched more and trying to learn more. I mean, this is pre-tutorial days of trying to teach myself how to beat juggle or how to scratch. You would just listen to records over and over and just try and mimic it. And Jam Master Jay was just that dude. I mean, and then you learn about Jazzy Jeff saying, well, everyone looked at him for kind of this inspirational piece. And so um, that was a lot of my entry into that piece of it. So I kind of, and similar to you, I mean, just the beats on this first album were just, so dope that you could just kind of mix in ways that made sense. And you could cut up and then for me, listening to people like Executioners or Scratch Pickles and Beat Junkies, just kind of take these things talking about two MCs and one DJ and how they cut stuff up. It was just like, man, that's a whole nother kind of cool level to it, that I think most people probably don't really understand. But like there's this whole just movement based off of the idea of who Jam Master Jay kind of started as sort of this party rock, or from the performance piece of Run-DMC, how important he was, which again is just kind of another kind of side piece to that. I think gets a little bit lost. And then I think when doing some of the thinking about some of the stuff this week with the research, thinking about Larry Smith and just the production side of it, because that's where I kind of am in the space now with the production. It's just like, man, some of these machines and stuff that he was using. I know we'll get into that, but yeah, that was sort of my entree into it. And so for me as a DJ turntablist, that's where it always hit me.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Yeah, no. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. This is great. And revisiting the album in preparation was it's like a kind of like a reverberating experience. It's taking me way back, man. You know, so yeah, so like just for um setting sake, I'm now 54, and I grew up uh um after leaving DC early on. I grew up where I live now in Columbia, Maryland, which is a planned city suburb right in between basically Baltimore and DC, which is important because that was what allowed me to get sort of, as I think I remember it, it was like a sort of a delayed echo effect from the New York area of music, mixtapes. And it just felt like, you know, so I when this album came out in 84, I turned 13 that year. And I don't know, all I can kind of remember, I was thinking about it all week, was it was just a vibe. There was something happening. And we didn't know exactly what I didn't know, at least, what exactly it was, what to call it, what the language was, where this was all coming from. But we had just started hearing things, you know, even of course years before that. I mean, and again, I don't always remember the chronology of when I heard stuff, but there was stuff happening. But when this album dropped, man, I mean, it's just like what they say. And, you know, first of all, the whole media environment was different. So growing up in between DC and Baltimore, there was no rap radio yet. There was no acceptance of rap in radio yet. And it was, as folks, I think, have to always be reminded, and salute to Mtume, we just had a great discussion that'll come out on his podcast soon, talking about some of this. But it was Black, at least nominally, commercial radio that was one of the major resistance points. They didn't want this thing called rap or whatever at the time. They were like, no, it's going to make us look bad. It's going to mess up our commercial stuff. This is all hoodlums and it's retro. Like, it was like a lot of negativity at the time, as I remember it. And that, and, you know, and I know the history books have now kind of clarified. So when this came out, I felt like I always felt like I was, you know, in some unofficial recruited army of hip hoppers that were supposed to defend this thing. Like, I don't know. And I remember I got my first black and red silk Adidas sweatsuit, and you know, I mean, you know, it was just, you know, the walking around these little tree-lined paths with my boom box and my silk Adidas. I mean, I can only imagine what I must have looked like. But anyway, so yeah, so it was, and the album, going back and listening to it, it stands, like, it holds up. Like, it's really good in terms of the production. And more so, and I know we can come back to this, that I was kind of struck by, it's that it's even a more political album. I don't want to go too far with it, but it's a more political album than I would have remembered or wanted to give them credit for looking back. So I mean, it was so yeah, we can come back. But those are just some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, man. I mean, it is too, and that struck me, you know, going back to, like, I didn't select it, you know, initially for this, thinking like, oh, because there's a political consciousness to the album. Like, that wasn't really my recollection of the album. But it
No.
does have some of that in there, and I think it's interesting as we get into the context of the people. Also, the Baltimore connection is pointed because, um, Russell and Run's father was from Baltimore, actually.
That's right.
And met his wife Evelyn at Howard, and then they moved to New York later on.
So if I can, so
Um,
that's actually, I forgot to mention that it's an important, just in terms of my own context here, that's very important because growing up here, we would get the local radio and television from both Baltimore and DC. So on the one hand, at a time where you only had like 3 or 4 channels anyway, I always felt privileged because it felt like we had like 8, because you would get the NBC affiliate, the ABC, if you get those affiliates from both cities. So it's duplicating the same content for the most part, but it just felt like. And then radio wise, as I said, there was no rap radio per se, but you would get some of these late night DJ shows that would come on, and then you would have AM radio shows which offered some more diversity as well, where you would hear, start to hear more go-go in DC, more club coming out of Baltimore, and eventually more of this rap music. And then you'd had all the DJ culture, and then of course we also had, to your point, you mentioned Howard University, and I think something that, I don't know if the two of you talked about this in your first episode, but the dynamic of the college radio. So we ended up having a lot of legendary college radio stuff in this area, as it would turn out. That again, I didn't understand it at the time, but it was all just sort of creating this environment yeah. Anyway, it was dope and was exciting. But yeah, I forgot to add that
yeah.
part in. Yeah.
No, I mean, just to clarify, our first episode, we were actually talking about sports betting and gambling and stuff like that. And so,
That's, I got to go back and watch, because I've been going like way into that lately. I've been following all of that. There's so many very interesting overlaps in that, with
Yeah.
with some of the crypto stuff that's been happening, and the AI. Like there's all kinds of like overlap with the gambling. Anyway, but yeah, all right,
Yeah. But I mean, first of all, the radio point I think is really important. And I mean, I guess that like maybe we could take a minute and talk about, this era just a little bit more broadly. I added a few things, and I'll probably add some more in the show description, just in terms of, both first of all, the 2-part series that Two Black from Black Miss Pod did with Rasul Moat on the book he wrote with Rob Swift, is excellent, and people should watch that, because it's like really a debunking of this idea of, Cool Herc pulling up with a set of speakers in like 1970, what was it, 3, right? And hip hop just starting from there, and like, as they say, this idea that like all 4 elements together just spring from the ground instantly as Cool Herc starts this, that like that this doesn't really make any sense, and it's it's a mythology. Not to say again that Cool Herc's not important, and is, and and that this party wasn't important to the development of hip hop and all of those things, because obviously that's very true, and that's not what they're saying. But they're saying that this idea that you can pinpoint like one specific moment as where hip hop, which is a culture, right, is just born, that there should be something about that we resist, in terms of, the narrative, and understand as serving a specific kind of cultural or commercial purpose, really more than anything, a kind of promotional purpose. And they talk about a lot of stuff. They talk about, which, it's really interesting to think about, and I'm curious your ideas on this too, Jared, because if you think about 73, or as they put it, really 71, like you're really talking about the prime era of like repression against the revolutionary movements of that period, particularly the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords as well, which is never a part of hip hop histories that try to talk about the beginnings of it. I mean, I shouldn't say never. There probably are some scholars who do that, but it's so rare and it's never in kind of mainstream, discussions of it. Obviously, they also talk about, which is talked about a little bit more, the South Bronx as a place that, has the Cross Bronx Expressway, rip through it, that is severed from the rest of the Bronx, is kind of isolated. And all of the austerity stuff that's going on in the 1970s with, New York getting close to default basically, and, getting bailed out by the teachers' pension system, and, then being really put in this kind of, period of financialization and oversight in terms of all that, and all of the cutting back of a lot of the programs, which again was a part actually of, as I think about it, the kind of counterinsurgency against the left in New York in that period, really, and the gains that were made through the civil rights era, as well as, you know, the Black freedom struggle and struggles of groups like the Young Lords and others, right? Um, and obviously, people know Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight, 79. Most people know that a lot of those rhymes were stolen from Grandmaster Caz, the Cold Crush brothers. I did put several links to like old tapes of Cold Crush live shows and stuff like that, which is also is a group, unfortunately, that is basically lost to history because their music was never properly I mean, one, they weren't a studio group, right?
Right.
They were a live performing group, but they also didn't there was never a proper translation of them into recorded rap. There are a couple of recordings. There was a live album that was put out at one point. There was much later, I think in like the early 90s, somebody tried to put out an album with them, but it was like, too late and wouldn't have made sense anymore anyway. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about with the context of this album too, is that there are all of these groups and artists and DJs in the 70s and early 80s who we may know their names, right? And we may even have some music from them that became, translated into records, but it really doesn't capture what they were doing and what they meant to the scene. And the hierarchy of that era, I feel like, becomes really murky and messed up in certain ways, right? Because people that folks were there would say, oh, Grandmaster Flash, Grand Wizard Theodore, DJ Hollywood, like these different people like had these big importance to folks in this era. And those are not necessarily the people that, when you go back and listen to rap music, become the folks that people go back to. Maybe the message from, Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5 and Melly Mel, but there's a lot of artists, and like another one in particular for me, the Treacherous Three, in part because I worked with LA Sunshine for a couple of years actually, when I was working in Harlem, and you know, great guy, really nice guy, and there's just a lot of names and groups that are kind of lost, and Run DMC comes in, I think, very specifically to this history in really interesting ways that I thought would be kind of fun to talk about. But yeah, Jared, other things from that era you would want to add or share?
No, I appreciate all of that. I think, and again, because, it comes up every semester with my classes, students who are almost, for me, exclusively Black or African diaspora in background, just don't know any of this history. It has not been institutionalized in any meaningful way. It's not and I think, as some of us have been arguing for a while, it predictably has gone the way of every other narrative, with any group, but particularly with Black people in this country. It becomes genrefied and designed to be marketable and palatable to predominantly white and affluent audiences. That's, as I understand it, and I've been debating what I should say about this, but so I won't sully your podcast with my pettiness, and I'll leave a name out. But I do think there's like this, that I've always thought of this as a signature story in my life that makes this point that this is well over 20 years ago now, when Jeff Chang's book Can't Stop Won't Stop was, so actually maybe longer before that book actually came out. One of his peer groups type of writers who would later come out with their own series of I think very questionable in terms of their narrative and politics and framing books on hip hop, was on a phone call with me, and I don't even remember how we ended up on this call. So it was definitely off the record. It was definitely not, but the point that this person was making was that, as they were pointing out, this guy at the time, relatively unknown Jeff Chang, had already been given a 6-figure advance to write his first book. And they were basically complaining to me as a writer, being a writer, I don't really know much about this. Their whole point was, how does someone, or why would someone who has done some, magazine articles, newspaper stuff and stuff like that, how do they get such a huge advance? Getting an advance at all is somewhat difficult even then, but a 6-figure advance to write their first book. And even this person who, again, is by no means where I think we are politically, was saying at the time that the point was to get someone who was a competent writer to start creating the narrative that would be marketable going on for generations. And I really wish I had the forethought to push them into an interview and record it and get that documented, because that was actually, I think, especially looking back now, what has happened in many ways. That book has become the dominant narrative for hip hop history, telling a certain story a certain way, and codifying a certain, again, narrative that I think ultimately is meant to convey this idea that hip hop is ultimately a success story, that these poor people come out of nowhere, produce this art, it's created billions and jobs and basic, and as Bakari Kitwana said in 2008, and I will never stop calling this out, hip hop is what made it possible for our first Black president, and saying like, this is a win, like, not, as I was saying, it proof of the evidence of its colonization, but that this was a win. And but so that's in that narrative, to this day. And I just was reading a paper like a week or two ago. They're referencing these same exact books in creating their own new, quote unquote, new research on hip hop. So it has become the canon. It has become the standard for, that and associated books like it. And that's so what you describe a little bit and what you were saying is what we end up getting. We see the same parallel with civil rights and Black power and other forms of histories. We get the names, we get the celebrity, we get the superstar, and then so much of the context, the other names, just gets left out. So I think you point out rightly that this is emerging as in the post COINTELPRO, to the extent that there is such a thing as post, and then defunding of schools. You have, so you have all these programs getting defunded. So I mean, there's others who have made this argument for years, and I agree with it for the most part, that the live band instrumentation that would have been taught to students in decades, prior, gets wiped out. And that's in part what encourages people to move from, and that's why Jam Master Jay would be said the DJ is a band. He's I forgot the exact phrase, but they would call he's the first DJ that said first one that said a DJ could be a band, because they couldn't get bands anymore who had instruments and training and space to play. And so it's much easier to get one person on one turntable or one a drum machine and let them do their thing, as opposed to we got to get a horn section, a drummer, a bass player, a rhythm guitarist, a lead guitarist, a keyboardist. We got to, who's going to, nobody's doing it. So like, and then, all of the stuff from plugging into street lights for electricity without permission to doing, it was all of these things that certainly my generation was encouraged, and I think rightly so, to see as this unconscious, beautiful sort of resistance and response to all that was going on in terms of you can't be here, you got no resources, no training. So people are just saying, well, we're going to gather, we're going to do our art, and we're going to create something new, and we're going to have fun. And people do forget, and I don't mean, I know he's a mess today, but Africa Bambaataa and them, I mean, that was the initial chant: peace, love, and having fun. Like that was part of the whole vibe and ethic that I remember growing up with. And it was like, but, and then I'll to be, bring myself to a close here. But one, you touched on this. One of the things that I think that my generation missed in our defense of this new expression that was being demeaned in the press and by black and white radio and all that other. So again, even MTV early on didn't even play black artists. It was Michael Jackson and Prince, and basically that was it. In our defense of it, we missed that context of what the music industry is, what media are meant to do in this society, what was happening with radio. This is still pre-Telecommunications Act. So there was some more diversity in ownership, but really no difference in terms of ad dependence and ad revenue driving commercial radio. And therefore, we don't want to mess up our ad revenue by having these young black thug rappers. We want to do the R&B and the blues and the, top 40. But we missed, and then we missed all the contracts. So to your point, about Sugar Hill, I mean, Sylvia Robinson, even as a black woman, is in many ways, I think we would have to say, guilty of bringing the colonial relationships of the industry to bear, right? And then she takes advantage of that and creates this concoction. I mean, to this day, I remember where I was in my friend's kitchen on a small little turntable where he put the record on for the first time when I heard the Sugar Hill for the first time. And I was like, what the? But then to rewind from that and realize that moment only occurred because of this horrific business capitalist corporate arrangement that and the fraud that Sylvia was concocting in connection with that industry to promote this thing that would end up not only becoming popular and creating, breaking the doors open for an industry, but would again codify that false narrative that I think we're still trying to unpack and redo to today, and especially after that 50th anniversary stuff, just proved that we've lost that part of the battle, that narrative part of the historical part. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Yeah.
No, I appreciate all of that. I wonder if you could take a minute to just talk, kind of about your frame with generally how you've talked about hip hop, but also, specifically through I Mix What I Like, just about thinking about colonialism and like the kind of dialectic of, around that with relation to hip hop. Yeah.
So sure, and I did just peek into the chat. Yes, Paul, I'm very excited for the De La album. Always for De La albums. But the short of it is, I just, my argument has really always been that what we call hip hop and its initial 4 elements in this cultural expression is not itself some separate and distinct culture. And this has caused me, some unfortunate loss of friends and, cliques and whatnot. I don't think hip hop is its own separate culture. I think it's a cultural expression of a colonized African descended population. And because of that, it takes on certain characteristics, the characteristics that produce the cultural expression, some of what we talked about, the context, but then also the capture of that expression by an industry itself designed to be the manifestation and the mechanism of colonial ordering of an internal colony is, as I do see Black and brown and indigenous people. And then so what ends up happening is whatever those communities produce is mined and extracted and commodified and marketed and reproduced, as Fanon said, to testify against the population that produced it. And then being a fan, I never, and I admit, again, in my post midlife crisis, hearing Doze talk a little bit about you become, how you went into your path to become a DJ. I always kind of regret that I never took my initial fascination with the turntables and made anything of it. But I always had a fascination, kind of like with drums, with the DJ role, playing what I always saw as the drummer's role. And then the mixtape. I just was like, when mixtape started sort of trickling down, and then I would eventually start going to New York, sometimes specifically only to go to mixtapes and find them on the corner or at the barber shops or I don't know. It was like it almost felt like looking for porn or drugs at the time. I mean, it was not legal. It was not, I watched sometimes cops chase kids. Like I've seen, like it was wild, like, but that sort of is what my fandom of mixtapes, and then seeing how they play in the socio-political economy of the country, I was like, that became where I started looking at it, how the mixtape could reveal not only a more appropriate history, but the actual context that would explain what's happening. And I think, unfortunately, correctly predicted where we are today. Ultimately, to say that the popular form of the expression is manipulated and reframed to be a form that will satisfy the needs of a ruling elite and a marketplace and the billionaire owners of the industry, and meant to mask the reproduction of the conditions that produce the art in the first place. Which is why I think, just yesterday, as we're interviewing with Renee on Saturdays with Renee, Andre Easton, who's running for I forget the arrangements of the seats there, but he's running for a political office as a PSL candidate in the Bronx. And he's talking about, as we're saying, like, the place that is supposed to have produced all of this wondrous change is still among, if not the poorest congressional districts in the country. So it's like, if just to overly simplify, how this has not been some revolutionary adjustment these last 50 years on the conditions of the people, after producing all of this popularity and fame and wealth and all of this for a handful of people, the broader communities are no better off, if not, in fact, worse off in some cases. So that's really been how I've approached it, and then, of course, part of what I've noted over the years has become the problem is that a lot of the popular hip hop scholarship and the narrative has been, I think, largely fraudulent in concocting this story that's more or less one of success and hope. And I don't, so it just revisiting this album, I'm like, it was kind of, it was great, but in some ways even sad. Because I'm like, the first song is Hard Times, about increasing, Reagan-esque era nightmare life. And here we are 50 years later, however, 40 years later, whatever. And it's this. And then people are telling me we should be celebratory and that my generation should be taking victory laps. And then just the other day, did you all see Eric Sermon hugged up with Leor Cohen, talking about he's going to be working with Leor's new AI initiative with Google Music? I mean, oh my God, man, this is such a total nightmare collapse. So So yeah, that's been how I approach all of this. Like we're Black people did, you know, the diaspora that produced this thing called hip hop um uh did a wonderful, magical, incredible thing given the circumstances, and we just lost sight of what was actually happening and what was actually possible with it. That's all. And so I don't mean any disrespect to what I love, but or to and I don't mean to suggest that kids should have been able to figure this out. I mean, because that's largely what was going on. You know, the people that I was looking up to was as the old heads were in their early 20s at the most, you know. Um, how are they supposed to have figured all this out? You know what I mean? So, but yeah.
Yeah. Doze, did you have anything else on that section?
No, it's sort of I mean, you guys are way more well-read and scholarly about a lot of this than I am on it. But I just from the Russell Simmons of it all. I mean, Jerry, you know, you talk about like the sort of the narrative piece and what gets told now. I feel like when I was trying to find some things this past week about, you know, the 40th anniversary of this album and things like that, there was a lot of this talk about, you know, well, this was the first album that it provided the blueprint for a rap or hip hop album kind of a thing, where you have the bragging song, the one DJ song, and then you know, one or two about what the commentary was in the communities, that kind of a piece, and like this should be the way it goes a lot moving forward. And it just makes me think about how sort of Russell Simmons sort of encouraged these pieces about it all, but then how he kind of jumped from artist to artist during that time, and what that even looked like, and how we kind of then consume it, right, and how it becomes this sort of business piece of it. But yeah, I agree with you. Like the 50th stuff is just wild, and where we are now, a lot of these things, this AI stuff. I mean, that's a bummer about Eric Sermon, but Timbaland did the same thing. He had some weird artist that he's promoting. Someone just put in the chat, Large Professor. Like that to me is like,
That is breaking
oh
my heart
man.
too. I'm like, I'm waiting for Paul to say he's lying.
Yeah. So it's just kind of a wild place that we've come. But and then I think someone else, maybe it was Paul in the chat too, but it's this idea of going from sort of this community piece of it, and you know, it being part of what was started from it, to go into this individualized nature, and just that change is just sort of a bummer, just because like as an art form, it's like the rhythms and music of it all is just still so dope. And then like again, as a DJ, I think about that whole piece of turntablism and where that has gone and how that looks, and still like, you know, checking up on break dancers. I mean, the Olympics is probably not the space for that, but you know, the fact that there's still a lot of
Just
huge
remember that
competitions
Australian lady.
yeah, just the fact that there's still like huge competitions that go on for that is still kind of dope. You know, and to see those kinds of pieces of it, it's like, man, I wish we had pushed a lot of that stuff a little bit more, as well as part of this piece of it. But yeah, just the capitalism piece of it is just, man, it's such a disappointment. It's so sad of it all. But that was my only contribution on that front for it.
No, that's good. It takes me kind of where I want to go next, which is I want to talk about all the people who are involved here and like what kind of were they all doing in this era. And spent the last week, you know, I mean, this is not deep dive research, but I did try to do as much as I could over the last week. And Russell Simmons is really important. And I even went and watched, which I actually hadn't sat through the whole thing before, the On the Record documentary, which is just a brutal watch. I mean, to watch all of these women recount stories where he sexually assaulted and in numerous cases raped them allegedly. And so I'll just say that, like, up front, there's over 20 sexual assault allegations against Russell Simmons going back to the 80s, and that he doesn't live permanently in the US anymore. He lives primarily in Bali, which a lot of people felt was to try to circumvent, he claims, I come back to the US all the time. He has settled a number of these civil, like settlements around them, basically. He has also been, there have been multiple articles about him not paying the settlements that he agreed to also, which is a
Oh,
whole
wow.
another layer of it. And I want to include that up front because I think it's not really, in my view, probably like a side note to who he is. I mean, I think this is like that, Russell Simmons kind of stepped into this world of like, how can I exploit certain things to my own advantage and, you know, become a more powerful figure and abuse with always the intention of abusing that power in certain ways. Right. And I say it too because he presents himself like he's the freaking, yogi Zen master. I know I'm like mixing religions and all of that stuff, but he kind of does that too, right? Like of kind of, creating his own, like sort of wellness cults basically. And even went and watched a little bit of The Show, which is a 1995 documentary, not like, it's not really a documentary, but a piece of media that also Drew Dixon, who is one of the people who has a rape allegation against him, was instrumental to that and did the A&R of the soundtrack, which is a great soundtrack. But in that, like he's like he's talking shit basically about like Biggie and Snoop Dogg and all of this stuff, and goes to visit Slick Rick in Rikers and talks about how he doesn't like going to prisons and like basically fuck people who are in there. And like it has a very kind of, and this is 95, like browbeating down on people for being too, for, criminal and like not, you're an artist, you have millions of dollars now, stop with the drama and stop messing around and like all this kind of stuff. And it was like, all of this was hard to watch, like, because you're just like, dude, like you have 20, you would end up in a position where it's not, just a couple of people who allege that violate them in the worst way, but it's a lot of people.
And
And
meanwhile,
we
he's
know.
abusing. I'm sorry to cut you off. My bad. Sorry about that.
No, you can jump in, but I mean, I would just say quickly before you do, like that, that that if 20 women come forward with stories like that, that there are however many factors more than that just didn't want to, because for all kinds of understandable reasons, not wanting to get involved in that kind of what that would mean to them personally and all of that. And so, yeah, what were you going to say though, Jared?
My bad. Yeah, and that's an important point, and I admit I assume that too. That if there's 20 on the record, there's at least 20 more off the record. And but I was just going to say that he's also, as all this is going on in the 90s and the 80s, he's also and far be it from me to throw this at anybody, but he's also wildly abusing at the time illegal drugs, from well, obviously weed, but cocaine and beyond. Like he was out there. He was so this idea that everybody should be on their P's and Q's because they're rich now, and is and then he should also know how rich they weren't, given the contract relationships and what the real numbers look like at the end of the day for most of these artists, even the more famous ones. So he should have, so all of that. But I do remember that this is, the only thing of his that I ever read was I think it was his first autobiography in maybe the late 90s, early 2000s. I can't remember the title now, but the one scene I remember him telling in that book is being on some private jet with Warren Buffett and all these white billionaires, and they're talking about and he's talking about how they're saying to him, "Oh, Russell, you're so, famous and you're a celebrity." And his whole point was he was lamenting that he was the poorest one on that plane, and that he's trying to get there. And I've just always, for me, that's like a signature tell from early, relatively earlier on, that's his interest here. His interest isn't the hip hop community, the hip hop culture, certainly Black people writ large. It's I'm trying to get there. And even with this first Run DMC album, he has already set up certain Adidas relationships and all these other stuff. So like he's already become turning them into something from the very beginning, that again, and I'm thinking of as a 13-year-old. There's no way for me to know, like I don't expect them in their 20s to understand what was happening, but there's no way for me to know that I'm being invited in to this corporate commercial relationship, that the Adidas sweatsuit I'm going to buy is exactly the point, or part of exactly the point to and we're talking about, again, I think it's important, like this was this was like relatively controversial in my house. Like we didn't have money like that, so it was like, that was I believe at the time, I want to say it was over $100 for that sweatsuit, because it was like a thing. Like I had to like go through some things with my mother to like give up future gifts, and argue. I'd make arguments and promises and beg, and like it was like a thing. It wasn't like just go get it. And but it was like, but that again, that was part of the point. And then to bring me into this hip hop world, to bring me in unconsciously into this fight to defend this cultural expression over the next decade, that would allow for the colonial takeover to happen without us recognizing it, or to not recognize that it had already happened, I should say. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, appreciate all that. I mean, so just back on these folks for just a second. So I wanted to put that up front, but like, so Russell's a party promoter. Like, this is where he gets his
Right.
start, right? And I think one of the things that was interesting in doing the research on this group is that all of the members, right? I couldn't find as much information about Larry Smith, who's actually the producer and the least recognized of all the people who are involved in the
Yeah.
first two Run DMC albums, but probably in many ways the most talented. But Russell, but anyways, all of them, they're all from two-parent families. The families own their homes in Queens. I know that for sure with the Simmonses. I don't know whether Jam Master Jay and Darryl McDaniels, DMC, whether their families own their homes, just because it wasn't stated in the thing that I read, but I believe that's the case. All of them have two-income families, right? So also, some of the jobs that they would do, like nurse and then nursing coordinator, teacher, um, uh, the Simmons father, he's involved a little bit in like labor/civil rights struggles out in Queens. Their older brother used to get on the PA system in high school and read quotes from Chairman Mao in between playing Jimi
Oh,
Hendrix lyrics
wow.
and stuff like that. And so there's an interesting kind of cauldron of
Man.
politicization and stuff that in the family a little bit too, which is probably, I think, where we get some of the kind of social commentary that exists within the album. But and I don't say all that like, there are other jobs. I think the Simmons parents, one of them works for Parks and Rec as like a recreation director for, I think, the Queens area, but within the New York City park system, attendance coordinator. So it's not like these people are rich. I want to be clear. That's not what I'm trying to say. Just saying, like, firmly kind of Black middle class that you're talking
Right.
about
They're
with
just
these
not the hood
families.
fantasy that we're always. And then DMC
Right.
even rhymes about going to college. And after 12th
Right.
grade, I went straight to so like they have that middle class. Yeah.
All of the members were in college.
Mm.
So Russell drops out his senior year of college and starts party promoting. He loses all of his money, and his father tells him to go back to school, and his mother gives him $2,000 to continue his business. So first of all, I would just say having the resources to be able to give
That's
$2,000
crazy.
to Russell Simmons. Also all the equipment that they had, like
So what would
Jam
the
Master
equivalent of
Jay's
that be
parents bought him
today?
it
What
was
would
like 8,000 was what it
it would be like
it looked like
8,000 today?
8,000. Yeah.
Damn.
It feels like it should be more than that even to me, but that's what I got
But who
quickly
has
from
8 grand in 2025 to just give to somebody who was dropping out of their senior year in college at that? I can't even like I got a college age kid now. I'm like, she's like, I would be
to be
flipping the fuck out.
yeah to sell weed and to
Yeah.
promote college parties
Dad, I'm about to
basically.
drop out to party promote. Give me 8 grand. Are you happy?
Right. So I just say that to say like they, I mean, I think this is part of the context of the South Bronx and of hip hop in that period too, is that even as like Rasul Moat talks about in that conversation with Tupac,
Yeah.
it did create the conditions where people came in from all over the city where they previously could not because it wasn't,
Mm,
you know, the street organizations and whatnot would not have allowed people to cross boundaries and to go party in different neighborhoods and that kind of stuff. And it was part of a context of a kind of truce that, happened in this
mm.
period. Right. Um, and so, Russell comes in and he's a party promoter. And quickly as there becomes an interest in signing acts, or getting deals, he figures out a lane and becomes, a manager very early on. And the first act that is really important that he manages is Curtis Blow.
Mm.
And Run actually starts as a DJ and then kind of a
That's right.
sidekick, the son of Curtis Blow, as a teenager. He's like 13 years old or something like that when he's doing this. And that's kind of like the big foot in the door. And I it's hard to get information on this, but in this era, like he's managing so many artists, and then quickly starts his own like production and promotional. Like he's starting companies. His first business card, I think, said Rush the Force in college parties or something like that. Like that's the other thing that's funny is like I think very quickly realized that in order to monetize it, like you had to get the college kids really heavily involved, right? And so doing that at City College later on when they start up Def Jam, it's in Rick Rubin's dorm
Yeah.
room at NYU, which is only like a year later than this. And so like he's the most important of the figures in terms of getting them access and being able to have the resources to be able to also when they cut it's like that as a 12-inch. Green Street fronts them the full studio cost on the strength of Russell's like
Mm.
relationship with them at the time, as well as they had heard like a little bit of the demo, that attic demo that they had made at Larry Smith's place, I think it was. But so I just wanted to give some of that, kind of context as well. Again, not to, I come from a family with similar, I had two teachers as parents and all of that. And it's just true. Part of it is the thing is like this stuff costs money. And I think that's the thing, like to be able to get to a place, especially in the 80s, but even, in the 90s and stuff like that, when we were doing stuff, you had to have equipment. You had to have you can't just even if you're just going to the studio time costs money, like all of it. So
And big
family
bulky equipment, not
yeah,
a laptop and whatever else, like crates of stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
So I don't know if either of you had any other points on here's a quote from Run. So one of the books I did read for this was Tougher Than Leather, which is written by Bill Adler, who's their publicist, right? So it's
Mhm.
like it also should be clear that like so much of what we have on all of these people is written
PR.
as PR. Right. So it's like you can't necessarily take all of this at face value. When I'm referencing things, predominantly I'm referencing things that are written by them, or with their approval, essentially, about their own backgrounds and circumstances and so on. But Run had a quote to Adler in that book where he says, "The worst thing that ever happened to me as a kid was that gym class would run out of time and I couldn't play my basketball game. Oh, yeah, I couldn't bring my radio to school neither. But that was it. No way was I brainwashed or hurt by being black. It's not like I never had any money. I always had money." And so that's Joseph Simmons, that's Run. And I just shared that again to sort of say, like, they come into that scene, in the South Bronx and in, Uptown and stuff in the early 80s, um, wanting to be a part of it very clearly. Like they loved, it's not like they didn't love hip hop or that they didn't want to be, MCs or any of that kind of stuff. And I think, we could talk about Curtis Blow, but, he is more of like, I'm not sure that he wanted it as much as he was just like, "Oh, I could make money doing this." And Russell was like, he was also Russell's friend, right? I think classmate, and not as talented, and so yeah, so that's I just wanted to kind of situate who these people were a little bit as we talk about the history there.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Good bit of
Um,
reminding work too.
so do you guys want to talk about any more about the kind of the co-optation? Or I mean, I think one of the things about this album, maybe as we move into talking about the album a little bit, is that it's presented as kind of the first pure hip hop expression in certain ways. Like they market it very much as like this was the b-boy energy that was authentic to what hip hop actually was, and they very much do this to counterpose it to um actually other acts that Russell, like Houdini was was one of Russell's acts as well.
Right, right.
Um, but I think Run in particular really gets credited, and DMC, like both of them get credited as they really didn't like a lot of the kind of disco inflected or R&B inflected. And that was kind of the context when you go back to those earlier albums. I think they're sort of right. Their argument is like these are R&B or disco albums that have rapping on them. And I think it's hard because it's always like there was both. Like as a part of the party culture, like that disco element and those disco bass lines and all of that, um, were central to it. It's also kind of the issue of sampling in that period, is that they don't yet have the technology or the sample time to really reproduce that kind of stuff. And so this album becomes basically a drum machine album in a lot of ways, with like maybe some live guitar played alongside and some things like that. Um, and Larry Smith, I should say, was also the bass player for Orange Crush, which was a band that was also, um, which is where Crush Groove and all that stuff comes in. It was also a band that Russell promoted. And he has a whole other background as a musician. Like he was a serious musician. He was a session musician. He toured with groups, performed with groups for a little while. And so he really creates the sound. But like one of the things that they're credited with, which I think is real, is that it's a very stripped down aesthetic versus what came before, right? So it's not a lot of instrumentation, not there's a lot of space for the rap to actually like take kind of center stage, as opposed to being another thing that's going on a record with a lot of things going on. um and I think that part is legit, but I also find it a little bit, I don't know how I feel about them also kind of distancing themselves in certain ways from the music that was coming out at the time, because I think like my understanding is rapping over good times was something that happened at all the parties too. So whether Sugar Hill Gang was, stole the rhymes, and whether Sugar Hill Records was doing a bunch of nefarious kind of stuff, like sure, but I don't think that it was not hip hop, in a certain way. And so I think also that painting of authentic, right, is also a marketing ploy by Run DMC and Russell to kind of create a lane for themselves that ended up being obviously a huge lane and a very influential one. But I don't it it's interesting to have these folks from Queens saying like, well, here's the real thing, when you have all these acts that were before that. And, you know, I don't know that I buy that it was all the record labels just messing up what they were doing. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that.
So, as I understand it, if I understand what your point, yeah, the everything you said is as I understand it, that um rapping sort of began as people were rhyming over already existing popular disco dance tracks. Eventually, the breakbeat part of it, the that would be looped famously to create some of the early tracks. And then I did read this week that the branding of the Run DMC's first album was this stripped down hardcore, and then I think if they weren't the first, I mean, they certainly were part of a pattern that plays out in ways even to this day of people promoting themselves as being more authentic and rugged or real than than whoever else. For all the talk today of industry plants and whatever else, there's always that I'm real, or even the whole thing of he's not like us. Like the whole anthem of he's not real, and I'm authentic. So I think that that's always part of successful marketing, certainly in hip hop. um Yeah, and I was just trying to I was trying to just, again, my memory about the music and the ordering of them is but I think that makes sense, that Houdini, and I was just even quickly googling Nucleus's Jam on It, like what were they sounding like and when were they coming out, to remind myself of the point, but that you and then the promo for this album is making even 2025, that it was a stripped down hardcore break from the and but I think that is largely true, and it makes sense given the history you just broke down, the sampling technology, the evolution of the idea of centering even the rhyme. I mean, again, part of the standard narrative that I'm admittedly in a contradictory way critical of, does say also that the MC or the rapper primarily only existed to big up the DJ at first. So centering the art, the rapper, giving them space to rhyme, all of that had to evolve, because initially it was just to say something while the DJ was transitioning or doing something else. Now, as they start to become more of a feature, and of course the industry would want that because it's easier to market, get everything down to 3.5 minute tracks with a hook and this, that, and the third for and all. It's easier to do that than it is a DJ routine or a dance set or a graffiti, art piece. So as the art, as the MC started to take more of a center stage, pun intended, the art of making room for it and producing for it evolved. And I think that's what we're talking about here with this Run DMC album. So yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we move through some of the tracks? And I think as we go through that, then we can kind of talk about, the, what they bring up and, some of that and move the conversation into the album. So the first song, as you said, is Hard Times. Um, the one thing I would say about it that's kind of interesting, it also gets into the context of this period a little bit and some of the differences with this period and later periods is that this song is not written by Run-DMC. So this song is a Curtis Blow record that they are covering that was written by Russell Simmons, allegedly. And they changed the lyrics a little bit. Like their version is definitely better than like un unqualified, in my opinion, better than the Curtis Blow version of the same song. It also comes, I mean, you know, Curtis Mayfield and Huey had a song called Hard Times. Like it's a kind of longer theme, talk coming out of the history. I mean, obviously blues, right? Like it's a much longer theme within Black music of talking about the socio-political conditions of an era and all of that. Um, it's also, I think, a little bit interesting in light of Run's comments that I read a little bit earlier that none of the people who are principally involved here really experienced personally, um, financial hardship in any way. But that doesn't mean that they're not surrounded by it and not seeing its effects either, right? So speaking to it, I think it still has a utility, but I think there is a kind of interesting thing of how that story can be a little bit co-opted too, right? So then we're talking about it like we're the ones who've gone through the hard times, and this is the kind of bootstraps, narrative that we're going to give you, but that's really not our story, that's somebody else's story. And but at the same time, like also objectively in my opinion a great song too. So I'm not here to like denigrate the music or any of that. It's just an interesting piece of history, and that piece about other people writing is interesting within Run DMC throughout maybe all of their work. I don't know. I know that and it's not to say they didn't write. Like Run absolutely wrote rhymes. DMC wrote all of It's Like That, I believe, and then they like, go back and forth with who's saying what. Um and then on their second album, LL Cool J writes one of the songs. And a lot of this is credited too. I should say it's not like ghost written. It's just like if you read through the credits and read through the history, they're open about it in that period too, which I say because it's like, I think it's really in the 90s when you start to get, maybe the late 80s, when you start to get more of a focus around this idea of people actually stealing each other's rhymes, or you're saying this but you didn't write it, so you're not real. Like that level of kind of authenticity discourse I think actually comes later. And so yeah, this first song is a cover, right, which is an interesting thing. Within There are covers within hip hop, but it is a rarer thing.
Yeah, I forgot about some of that, and then I just had this whole memory of being teased at one point, being called Baby Huey, because he was, chubby and light skinned, and I was, and I had an older brother that in the Navy that used to mess with me about that. He's like called me Baby Huey. I was like, oh man, that's messed up. But it's a great track. Baby Huey was dope, and his version is of Hard Times is really really good. And it was sampled by now I'm just having a memory too. Who sampled that recent somewhere?
Ghostface.
Ghostface. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's
That's it.
what,
And you got the
buck
blue horn.
50, I think, on
Some I
I
at
think
least
it's
one song did that. I think
yeah.
that's the one I'm
Yeah,
thinking of. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not the only one, but yeah, I think it's sampled by Ghostface on Buck 50 on Supreme Clientele, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken. But
that sounds right.
um,
But
yeah,
yeah, so but anyway, but um yeah, now I just distracted myself. But yeah, I think you make a good point though about the it is also part of the theme within rap music history of that you're pointing to of that authentic, I have to promote myself, the whole thing of the studio thug that we would hear about later. Y- you know, they and the claims of living lavishly have to be references to today, having come up and become successful, not starting at that point. Um, so yeah, it makes sense that they would have in some ways downplayed their more middle class origins, even from the initial. They're not starting with it's hard times, but less so for me or us than it's like that you. Um, But yeah, and I was also thinking that it's interesting because the first line is that it's talking about they're coming. So in other words, like they're not here yet. Hard times is coming. Like it's like a warning. So now I'm starting to do a whole thing of maybe they're really talking to their black bourgeoisie. It's like a warning to their fellow black bourgeoisie, like you know, because it said, don't let it catch you, like don't let the hard times catch you. So, stay one step ahead in these tree lined relatively streets. Yeah, anyway, yeah, I lost my train of thought there. Let me stop rambling.
No, all good, man. So Rockbox is the second track on the
Yo.
album. One thing is really important is that, and I think this was a genuine genius of their marketing, and of Russell understanding, what could help them become huge, which was, this is one of the first records. There's a Treacherous 3 song that has a guitar. I went back and listened to it. It's not like this. It's not heavy metal sounding guitar riff. I read something that compared it to Jimi Hendrix. It did not sound like Jimi Hendrix. This song, I mean, obviously it becomes the video from the album. It gets onto MTV, and I think a a clear understanding from them that, if they could tap into the white rock and roll audience, that was a huge potential coup and would take them out of just being a kind of New York City party, act. And it did. I mean, there's, we should actually talk about the singles that come out first, because it's like that Sucker MCs is their first single, which maybe we should actually. But anyways, Rockbox second album on the track is huge.
But
In
did those
terms
songs
of,
get the video though? They didn't get. Did they get
no,
video? Yeah, that's what.
no,
Yeah, and we should remind folks that at that time the video was the thing. Like this was, if not fully by then, it was becoming. That was the marketing goal at the. If you didn't have a video, if you didn't get an MTV or at least Video Music Box or whatever, you were not. It wasn't considered. I think headed for success. So I think you make a good point that's the video, that's the track that was targeted and set up to be marketable. And I remember loving it. For whatever it's worth. I mean, I don't know to whatever extent I was the exact target audience at that point, but I loved it. And in revisiting it for today, I was like, I still love it. Admittedly though, not as much as it's not my favorite song on the album, which I think it was at the time. Nowadays it probably, I don't know, Sucker MCs, I don't know, when we'll come back, I don't know, but it wouldn't be my favorite song on the album now. But at the time it probably was. Yeah.
it was for me when I heard the album for the first. Like it's the one I remember most. You know, when I had it on CD, like having my CD player on repeat for that
Oh
for that
man.
song.
So my bad. I'm looking at the video now. Like I know we can't play it, but like I should have watched it again before. I only listened to it. This is super white middle class audience targeting. The video is like a complete. They even got Jam Master Jay winking at a little white boy. Uh, it reminds me of Ezra Edelman's point in OJ Made in America about the Hertz commercial OJ did, where they put the white people in the airport. So and the old white lady saying "Go OJ, go" when he's running through the airport to like as a conscious mechanism. They said the filmmakers, the director of the commercial said to convey to white audiences that when you see this black man running through the airport, you shouldn't be afraid. you should. So, and this video is doing that. And I do remember, that was what I did remember. The brother who they at least portray as playing the lead guitar in the video has that Jerry curl, real corny. Because I remember even thinking this as a kid. He's looking like this real soft, corny Jerry curl. And then you see all the 80s, the white girls and all, like this is, oh wow, this video, yeah, they really we got. So yeah, if I don't know what you want to do here, but I would encourage people to as they come up on this section of this video, pull up the Rockbox video and just look at it and even without the sound, I think it's even more telling.
Yeah.
This is crazy. This video is
Somebody
crazy.
asked, and I remember the video, but I don't remember this part. Is there an art museum scene in the beginning, or is that rock? Is that King of Rock? That's
No,
Rock Box.
there's like a yeah, it's got like a, well, it's not an art museum. It's like a white guy who's giving this talk in a suit, and then they pull up in a car to a show.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And it's mostly black and white, right? And it
all
comes
black and
through
white,
in
yeah.
like in the screen. Yeah.
And the first
I
one of the
mean,
first shots you get is that smiling little white kid. So it's like he's like again, it has to be, he's letting everybody know like these guys are cool and they're safe. And he's literally winking. He and Jam Master Jay literally exchange a wink. This is unbelievable. And then they have like a whole bunch of white, dancers and audience members. So this is very much saying like these guys are safe. This is okay. Don't be afraid. And then the song slap. Like they even got the black dude in the Carlton vest with a tie on, sweater with a tie on, like the nerdy safe blacks. This is, oh my god. Hey man, this is like I think this is a perfect little parallel to your, oh, they do have some color. They throw some color to your Imperial 80s thing, man. Like this video is madness. I should have watched it before the show. This is crazy.
yeah.
We got God. How did we survive the 80s, man? How did I make it here? I deserve a plaque.
Oh man. I mean, and I think that's like, actually, to sit there for a second. You talked about, feeling a need to defend it and all of that stuff. I mean, I think it's like I have this very sort of contentious relationship with all of this stuff in my mind, right? But like, I also think it's hard for people like in our era. I just felt like there wasn't a lot for people to kind of like plug into and feel like was theirs, or something that was really interesting. And I mean, people have talked about hip hop as like a space for study, right? A space where you get into it and you learn about history of music, you learn about all the different things that are being referenced. And I know that when I got really into it, that was how I approached it, right? And I mean, Mark remembers me like this as a freshman in college, and just that was the thing that I delved into. And led to a whole bunch of confusion ultimately, in my opinion. But it was there was like and I mean, I guess the question is, was there a movement, right? Or was it just really effective marketing on us for, 15 years or whatever to kind of pull us into this space that was mediated by all the, contradictions of an art and young people trying to do something within a very commercial dominated, you know, kind of space where there really was not actually a lot of revolutionary potential. I mean, I think this is part of the thing, because I think that, we could talk about the revolutionary potential of hip hop as a movement coming out of, this phase of the repression of, the Panthers and the Young Lords and, all this stuff that's going on within that social cauldron and all of the repression and austerity and everything else in New York in that period, and then in other cities as it goes to other cities. But the the thing that we end up getting by the time it gets to be on MTV, which is already here, like it's you're not even getting Hard Times on MTV, or it's like that on MTV. You're getting Rockbox, which again, like I love this song, and but it's not it already with that messaging and the video and everything else is actually not teaching us anything radical at all. And is really just a cultural it's a commercial vehicle for them to become millionaires essentially.
I think as you were talking, it occurred to me that I think that there are parallels between what we've seen happen, like with Black Lives Matter or something else. It's uh the sort of a righteous initial expression is not either given time or in advance properly organized, or because the community isn't. So it's very easy to see, looking back, I think, at least not at the time, of course, that what had happened previously with television, where the idea was, okay, black people, you want to be represented, you want representation, fine. And you want something slightly better than Amos and Andy, fine. We'll give you Good Times and What's Happening in Sanford and Son, the Jeffersons, congratulations. Um, and then with hip hop, it was kind of the same thing. You want inclusion, you want to be in a movie, you want to be in, you know, uh, uh, you want to be respected. It's fine. We'll have the breakdancers come and perform for Ronald Reagan. And at the time, I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I remember as a kid watching it that night, the Kennedy Honors or whatever they were performing at, and Reagan sitting up there watching the New York City Breakers, whatever it was, whatever they were. And I'm thinking, this is it. This is my generation has arrived. And obviously looking back, that's like that is somebody should have been like, no, please don't do this. Stop the performance. But that's what so uh I agree. It just becomes it just is welcomed into something that is very corruptive and co-opts and regurgitates, again, even with this album that we're talking about, even with one or more, including the first song, making reference in some kind of way to some kind of difficult political reality. The song that's most heavily promoted is this rock box thing, and it was great. And then again, if you watch, I'm looking at it in the end of the video, they're literally like high-fiving with that white boy. It's like he's the one, like they're showing you at the end, like he's walking off, like almost like like they've won a game, like like they're carrying him off the field. It's like it's so that in no way does that is that song meant to introduce you to a group that's talking about the difficult realities of a community, blah 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 blah. It's to say, no, these are cool, this is great, we're back on track with white America loving what black people produce and mimicking it. And I think in this way it makes sense that it's a rock and roll based song, because it signifies what they've already done with rock and roll. Now it's like, we're going to use that again to get you with rap. And but at the time, man, it was great. I mean, I was and it was, and I think it's an important lesson to be taught to today's in successive generations, that was, we did, and I know I did, certainly felt like this was signifying that the world was going to get better and we were going to win, and we were going to force the world to reconcile with this new black and brown art, and nobody can stop us, and at this and we didn't realize, no, they're not trying to stop it, they're going to take it and make use of it. But we did, yeah. So, oh man, that video, oh man, that was crazy. Just watching that just now is crazy. It's crazy.
So, is anything you want to say about these first couple songs or whatever? Or just wait.
From a musical standpoint, or just interest standpoint, Rockbox, I think for me is my favorite track on this album. And then again, just trying to think about the whole Larry Smith side of it all, where he, again, he's a musician, and played for people, helps record on records, and then did live performances and things like that. And some of the things that I'd saw or picked up and read upon this week was just the fact that he was like, well, we couldn't get musicians for this album, so how can I figure out a way to incorporate some of that stuff at the same time? And that's where the use of the drum machines kind of came in. But he still sort of had brought in a guitarist for certain tracks, or what have you, or played himself on some of these things. And just in terms of the conversation that we're having with it now, it's like, there is no kind of, well, I'm doing this as a bigger statement on something else. It was, I'm just making this piece of music and art, and then it becomes, what it becomes, and used in ways that probably is not thought of how he was thinking about it. It was just, these are my tools, and I'm limited to what I'm using now, and this is what I can do in a recording studio. So let me go ahead and do this. And then, it just gets taken on to be changed into something completely different, or something that, for his mind was just, oh, I'm blending these things that I know as an artist or musician, and then he goes in a different direction. So, but yeah, this track is just, I don't know. You play it now, you're just like, I can't not move or bob my head or what have you. So, because that's just kind of the power of it. But yeah, I was just looking at the video too. That is wild.
Yeah, I mean, to say something about Larry Smith too. So he produces this album. He produces King of Rock, which I don't think is as good of an album. It has a couple of songs. Like, I love the song. The title song is fire, but I don't think it's as good of an album as a whole. This album, I mean, and that's not unusual, right? Like, this album is full of rhymes that they had been working on or whatever, and it's kind of like the best of what they had for it. And that's often the case with the first album, is guys are kind of developing their rhyme books and their rhymes and stuff like that for sometimes 5 years or so, right? And then you finally get to an album and you can kind of put all of your best work into it, and then they go on tour, and they're put another album out basically less than 12 months later. And just wasn't really the studio time or the time to really focus on the craft as much. Raising Hell is their third album, which obviously, like, is where they really blow up, largely due to the collaboration with Aerosmith, of course. But I bring that history up because Larry Smith kind of, I think, a little bit acrimoniously, although that's my read of it, kind of splits with Russell and the group after King of Rock. wanting to take them in a different musical direction. And I don't know totally what that would have been. He also was the producer for Houdini as well. So, it could have been more, it sounded like it was a little bit more of an R&B kind of direction that he wanted to go, and they didn't want to go in it. But the other side of that, of course, is that Rick Rubin is in the picture by this point. And he's a business partner of Russell at this point at Def Jam. They started out of Rubin's dorm room, and he becomes the sort of um, I always hesitate with how much to put on Rick Rubin as a figure, because I've also heard stuff where people were like, he doesn't even really know how to play instruments, and like he was kind of a producer in the same way that you know Diddy or somebody like that might be. I don't know whether that's true, because there's all these stories that people tell about him having all this equipment in his dorm room and playing stuff on the drum machines, and then he was in a band too. So like I think he probably has some musical skills and sensibilities. Obviously, he's very involved in LL Cool J's first album, which is a kind of similar style in a lot of ways to.
But in what way though?
Larry.
Because I've always been curious about that too, and I've without really doing the follow-up research on it. Is it because every time I hear him discussed by people, it's always about more like a vibe, like on that Zen thing again. It's like he's just a genius. But I'm not really clear how that translates onto the actual track itself. So yeah,
I'm not either. But that's the story, right? Is that Larry Smith, does these first two albums, like is credited, but also I feel like in this era particularly, the producer is not a very it doesn't take on the kind of role that it does when you
right.
get to like the mid 90s, where people talk about DJ Premier, talk about Pete Rock, they talk about RZA, right? Um, the producer is really kind of an unknown figure often, especially in the early 80s. Maybe Marley Marl is kind of like one of the first ones that might take a little bit more. He's also a DJ, but he takes a little bit more of a role. Yeah, do you have something on that, Dose?
Well, and someone brought it up in the chat, but the sampling piece coming in, so that was sort of the late 80s is when that starts to come really into big things with Marley Marl, and just the chopping of pieces, and again with the technology of how some of that stuff kind of changed, right? Because as opposed to just the pre-made drum machines, where you kind of just program in what you need to do, you could then start manipulating sound differently. And that too is where some of that break off with Run-DMC kind of happened from that third album on. But yeah, that was just kind of one piece of it. Because yeah, Larry Smith he was at first like, oh, I'm not a fan of this whole sampling thing. And then I was reading some interview that later on he was like, oh, I kind of regretted that kind of stance of it. But maybe that's sort of where the change happens.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, like I was just looking it up
Go ahead.
on that one because I know Walk This Way was the big hit from Raising Hell, but to me, Peter Piper is still by far the best track. It might be my favorite Run-DMC track, period. And then I was looking up who produced it, and I also remember because I forgot the lyrics and played it at my daughter's elementary school party once, and forgot that right at the beginning there's a really unfortunate bit of language, but the beat was all I was hearing in my head. I was like, we got to, and then I heard that, I was like, oh my God, it's kids. But anyway, then I forgot Run-DMC even cussed. But anyway, but it says here, my point when bringing that up was that this favorite song of mine, it says is produced by Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons and Run and DMC. But I don't know who did what, and I don't know what that means, and who actually put that beat together. So I would like to know more about that. But yeah, I don't know what Rick Rubin.
Yeah,
yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
I'll also say Russell's that, like, Russell shows up on credits all over these things, and like I don't get a sense that he did anything other than maybe like try saying it this way, like or something like that, that kind of Like he doesn't even really talk about himself historically as like a producer in that kind of sense of like, oh yeah, I was in there like, you know, helping make the beats or whatever. Like I don't think he really did any of that. But this was, you know, I should have said this a little bit, but like, so there was the party promotions, there was his management company. There's Def Jam. There's also this thing that happens called Rush Associated Labels, Rush Associated Labels, right? Which, you know, all of this stuff eventually kind of merges, and you know, especially as Def Jam like kind of sells itself, and he makes hundreds of millions of dollars off of that. But um he had his hands, you know, and was involved in this is kind of an early point in his career. Before this, obviously, he's involved with Houdini and he's involved with Curtis Blow, and there's a bunch of artists that don't really translate much to the recorded world that he's also managing in this period. But you know, when you get especially to like the late 80s, you know, early 90s, like there's so many people that he at least manages for a period of time, or they're a part of his production company or one of his labels. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think even less. I don't know this for sure, but I get the sense that people talk about it that Ruben actually was doing some stuff musically involved in these processes, whereas you know Russell really was not. Although he might have, he does get that writing credit on Hard Times, so he may have had a role with that. But there's other people too. I forgot to mention, like there's this guy JB Moore, who's this like white guy who works for Billboard, who also you know helped write and produce for Curtis Blow. So he gets credits on this album for that as well for Hard Times. And so yeah, it's just there's a lot of people involved, I guess is what I'm saying. Beyond who we know. But yeah, so the next song here is Jam Master Jay, which I think now that's the sample. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean this is important. It's not the dawn of DJ records, you know, obviously Grandmaster Flash, you know, you know, they have an album I think in 80 or 81, probably 81, um, that also then delves into, as happened with a lot of artists in that period, like all kinds of legal battles and, you know, him actually leaving the group and it, you know, kind of reformulating around Melly Mel and that sort of stuff. Um, but it is, you know, this album I think it creates a kind of prototype for the 80s in a lot of ways that is replicated of, you know, I mean, I think about like Eric B and Rakim albums of, you know, having several kind of MC led things and like, okay, well, we'll have a couple of songs that are just sort of dedicated to the DJ. I mean, the Eric B and Rakim ones are funny because, you know, Rakim, I think, actually did all the scratching on those and then just said it was Eric B.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But Jam Master Jay was actually a DJ, and a pretty talented one. You know, not Grandmaster Flash level, but you know, fairly talented, and was, I think, to Mark's point, to the point you made early on, Mark, he was critical to their live show and actually would start everything off on their live show, and then they would bring in, you know, Run and, well, I think DMC and then Run, and that is very important, I think, to them as a group and to what we got as an image of hip hop in that era of the two MCs and the DJ being the band. And I will also say and I'm probably being unfair with this because I think, for instance, the Eric B and Rakim DJ songs are fairly bad for the most part. As much as Rakim's like my favorite rapper ever, but um, the these are pretty good. Like this and Jam Master Jammin', like 4 DJ songs in that period, without it being a group that's necessarily DJ led like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five was. I think that, this song and Jam Master Jammin' on King of Rock, that like those hold up pretty well for DJ songs. But yeah, I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that.
Only that I mean, they're DJ songs in that they promote the DJ, but they still involve, at least the one I'm remembering for this album, they involve, lyrics. So it reminded me again of that original purpose of the MC, which was to big up the DJ, and I thought that might have been their part of the way of doing it. But and now I'm wondering. No, I'm being too cynical. I was wondering because Jam Master Jay, yes, he was a good DJ, but he was never known as, a legendary, member of that community. And I'm wondering to what extent that him being marketed as a DJ and a band was used for the live performance element in part to get crowds. Because we should also remind people that back then, that was their primary mechanism for making money. This is before the 360 deal, and touring still was very, very important. And most artists, if I'm not mistaken, got a lion's share of the tour money as opposed to a much smaller percentage of record sales. So but I'm probably doing too much with that. But it makes sense to include at least one song promoting the DJ, regardless of his status within the DJ community, if in fact you have a touring element, and he's that important, as you said rightly, to the live show. And he was. I mean, you could see. I never saw them live, but you could see endless performances, and he played a big role. And that's not always the case for DJs, by the way, either. So like to have that kind of central role to the live show.
I know you'll have things to say on this, Doze, and I'd love to hear it, but I just wanted to add one kind of note, is that they definitely cite, even in that Tougher Than Leather book and in other stuff, as, Jam Master Jay, I don't want to use there's obviously the term street cred, which is like, what does this actually mean? But he was the person who was like known in the community and had relationships that also helped them with their own mobility. And he had a reputation, let's just put it that way. And so they also I think they needed him to a certain extent for their own credibility and kind of local relationships in Queens. There's also funny stories, like they forgot to bring him on their first show in the Bronx and it goes terribly. But yeah, and they, but I think that is one element, is beyond what, and I mean, in some ways that's similar to Eric B and Rakim, although I think with Eric B, he actually provided more financially for the making of all this stuff and so on. But that you might need a DJ just to have kind of the crew that comes with the DJ too and stuff like that. And I think that both of them being, I mean, DMC goes to Catholic school, and they all end up going to college, all three of them. And so I don't know. I mean, it's just sort of like being a little bit of an interloper, I guess, in some ways in the community. Like you might need somebody who has a little bit more credibility. And he's also credited very much with the fashion sense around everything, right? Of like, they're really borrowing from him and his style in terms of what they end up creating as the fashion and the imagery of Run-DMC, which is a huge part of the kind of what helps them, I think, to blow up on kind of a mainstream level.
Yeah, I think Russell saw him with the hat or whatever, and was like, "Oh, you guys gotta," told Run and DMC that, "Oh, you guys gotta copy what he's doing on that front." But yeah, he is credited, I think, with some of that stuff. But I think for the DJ aspect of it, it's one of the best examples, I think, of the incorporation musically with just the MCs kind of playing off each other with this, sort of the rub cuts back and forth, and then using his name as sort of this kind of sampling technique. Because then if you just start from there, it births a whole new set of routines in the DJ community from a track like this, which I think is important. But yeah, just the live piece of it all, I think was just very important because it was, trying to. I mean, this is probably just going to the whole marketing of themselves again, but it had a big part in their live show and what he was doing, and again, just kind of led us down a cool path, I think, over the late 80s, early 90s, where DJs played pretty cool roles in terms of the production of it and the live piece of it. I think that's another thing that kind of gets missed in sort of these first two albums, in terms of what he did with Larry Smith, because they talked a lot about how, you know, they would go in and record their vocals from a certain time, and then Jam Master Jay would sort of stay behind with Larry and just do a whole bunch of stuff on top of it. And I think that always gets kind of lost within this kind of a shuffle too, because I think that, we can probably get into the whole music business side of these things, but it's one of the reasons why I think the album stands this 40-year period, is because it is cohesive in this way because of things like having this DJ piece of it that kind of plays a role in the sonic nature of the album, and just kind of the cohesiveness that goes forward with it, and just sort of the techniques that happen. And I think as like the DJ, I think he played a cool role in that piece of it.
So I wanted to share, like, I took some screenshots from the Tougher Than Leather book. So this is their first photo shoot in '83. And
Before they got their
Jay,
style together.
yeah, like Jay has the buckle, Jay on his, but they're kind of like, and this was the point that was made in the book about this, is like that DMC and Run really had no idea what they were doing in terms of style. Like, you could see the b-boy stance with Jay, but they are just kind of look out of sorts and out of place. There's another one here that I want to show. There's some funny stuff. This, I think this was at the show that they forgot to take Jay to. um, and I'll try to look up the venue in a minute, but it did not go well. And they were made fun of. They got made fun of for their plaid jackets, although they did say that was an idea from Jay.
They remind me of the corny cousins from oh my god, my memory is so bad. It's my favorite, from Five Heartbeats, who keep reoccurring throughout the film, and they look like they're popping up there trying to reinvent themselves from some 50s or 60s doo-wop group. We're gonna be rappers now.
This
Wow,
is
Dick
them
Clark.
with
Wow.
Dick Clark. They were a part of a number of firsts, right? And so, I mean, I think that's also, as contentious as firsts are, right? They are the first rap group on American Bandstand, and maybe the only, or one of the only ones that was ever on American Bandstand. They, yeah. I mean, I could go through some of that later, maybe, but yeah.
And that has a whole important history too. Dick Clark, American Bandstand, and payola, and manipulating popularity, and Dick Clark being in many ways racist in his practices of who he would allow to perform, like all kinds of scandalousness. So But yeah, so yeah.
Another figure we should bring in and discuss, of course, is Leor Cohen, who was worked for Russell and even in this period and was their their tour manager, right? So he, even from the beginning, I'm not sure about the first tour, at least by the second, but maybe even the first tour, he is their manager. And yeah, another very, very shady, individual who has a long history of super profiting off of rap music. But he starts working for Russell in this period, and it's also, we're saying is that they Russell and I mean Rick Rubin really founds Def Jam with Russell as his partner. But in '88, Rubin leaves, and it's because Russell is replacing him with Leor in that period. And so that's also just an interesting kind of aspect of that history, and I wanted to bring in that he's involved there from that early point, because I didn't know that really actually until I dug in and started doing some research on this album a little bit.
And Paul is right again. Shout out to Yassine Bey. He's some
Yeah.
tall Israelis running this rap.
Yeah.
And he's a huge Zionist. He is big time. He loves him some Zionism.
Yep. And another person on that tip is Brett Ratner, who doesn't he doesn't show up yet, but he starts making music videos in, I think, around 1990. But
Yeah,
he's
he's pretty early
also,
on. Yeah.
I know he directs Rush Hour, right? Which is also where you start to get, this is actually, I think, where the assault claims started to come up with Russell, was actually claims that because Ratner had a Me Too moment first, and then because Russell and Ratner worked together on Rush Hour, then that's, I think, when the first Me Too claims came about, involving Russell, and it involved both of them initially. And he also, I believe, is the director. I couldn't, for some reason, this didn't show up on IMDb, but I think he also directed the show, which was the 1995, documentary that Russell stars in, along with Notorious B.I.G. and Snoop and Warren G and Slick Rick and a bunch of other artists. But he's also, so there's just like a lot, and he is also a huge Zionist and supporter of Israel, and is one of the people who came out like very publicly with a bunch of pro-Israeli stuff, in the wake of October 7th and the genocide, when people started to criticize Israeli policy, and was very much a big supporter of what you know of the genocide, really. So yeah, the so next we get,
Which just
yeah, go
quickly,
ahead.
I'm sorry, but just quickly, it just as is, I think, important in terms of this narrative we've been talking about, and what we missed in terms of my generation, and in over the last 50 years, that these are the figures who played a major role in determining who was successful, which artists were known, who had a career, who didn't have a career, and their politics discussed here in terms of Zionism have to be understood as part of the recipe.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And Adam Smith, shout out to Adam. Shout out to the other Adam Smith, not the Wealth of Nations.
the better Adam.
uh, yeah, the better Adam. That he was also, and he clarified this, on the board of the LA Police Foundation,
Wow.
until his Me Too moment, and yeah, so
Wow.
that's all important. So next we get, I'll just do these. So there's Hollis Crew, I think a good song. I don't know that we need to delve, deeply into that one in particular. It also, so one of the things that they do is there's a beat called Action, which comes from so the Treacherous 3 have a version, but I think there was actually a break. I'll have to go back and look at this and see if I can find it. But um, it's sort of the action break, and that's one of the primary beats that um, Larry Smith, kind of creates a drum machine version of, and that's why Hollis Crew is called Crush Groove 2, Sucker MCs is called Crush Groove 1, and it uses that break basically, or the drum machine version of it. And Sucker MCs to me is the better song, and it's also probably, I mean, it's certainly more important in the kind of ascension and lore uh of Run DMC. It's the B-side of their first single. So their first single is It's Like That, which is a great song, which we'll get to in a minute. But Sucker MCs was a song that I think a lot of us, I'm sure, knew, and it was like a big, I don't, I'm open to hearing either of your thoughts on it, but it was certainly very much the kind of, braggadocio, the b-boy style, the, dissing other rappers, right? And kind of trying to bring sort of a battle aesthetic to records, which it's not that that's not there again in earlier records. Like that's always a part of what emceeing, kind of is this sort of battle and braggadocio aesthetics. But it was a song, again, very stripped down with this beat and just them, going at other MCs, at the suckers, right? And it's one that is cited by a ton of rappers who grew up in that period as like one of the things that like made them want to, do that, right? And I think that's, you know, an honest reflection by a lot of people. So
Yeah, and it's got that iconic intro. 2 years ago, a friend of mine asked me to say some MC rhymes. So I mean, it was dope, and it's still right. Uh, even now, it's like, ooh, it works. It works. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times that has been used as an opening for some, like a newer MC sort of introduction, and how that still plays really well, I think is just super important. But yeah, it made everyone, I mean, you would be on this in the schoolyard, right? Just saying it to your friends because you thought you could do it too. So just sort of that the power of that. And there's just something nice about this. I think just the simplicity of just a drum and just the rhymes, which becomes very important over the next sort of period for where hip hop was going, just musically, I think. But again, it's comes down to who gets played and who wants to hear what, right? But I think it does play a huge role in what ends up becoming the next decade or so from there.
yeah, so Paul is on this. This is correct. Action is actually, so it was an Orange Crush song. So Orange Crush, again, being the band that Larry Smith is a part of. That and Treacherous 3 used the drums basically to create a song called Action in '83, which there is a whole really, I think, kind of, there's a story that I would love to see more intently explored, which is, Run DMC and Russell Simmons versus the Treacherous 3, right? There's a beef here. And it extends into LL Cool J's, career. Obviously they, LL Cool J and Cool Mo D famously go back and forth for years. Um, but and I will say too, like I do, when people talk about, Run DMC is like the first to do this or that, like I encourage, go back and listen to the new rap language by Treacherous 3 in 1980, and like the rapping that is occurring on that album and how freaking sophisticated they all are as MCs. Like, and so just to say that the Treacherous Three was a very serious rap group in this era, and one that also had translated into making albums and making singles. They do break up around this time, and Kool Moe Dee goes solo. And there's that. But I think there's something about, there's also on, is it on Sucker MCs where they do the not 5, not 4, not 3, but 2? I can't remember if it's on that or another song on this album. It is on this album, but they say that was a diss of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, the Fearless 4, the Treacherous 3, right? And that, we're the 2, right? And so there was, and a lot of this is just, whatever, like, I think fairly innocuous, like, competition and, attempt to situate yourself as the best, against all these other groups, which is always a part of, rap music and hip hop culture more broadly. But that action break being used by the Treacherous Three, and this was something that happened a lot in the early days, is that everybody would rap over the same songs, right? So it would be big. There was the Good Times. There was also that song Genius of Love, right, which is the sample that Mariah Carey uses on Fantasy, and it was big Lotto with Big Energy recently, and like, but that particular sample was used heavily in the early 80s by a bunch of different groups. And so one of the things that's interesting, I guess, about this album is it does do something where they take the action break and use it multiple times, or like slightly change it, and kind of use that same sort of beat pattern roughly multiple times in the album, but they're not taking, a loop. And like you said, this is probably primarily a financial consideration, because Sugar Hill Records, they were obviously screwing over artists, but they also had full bands to do their albums because they didn't actually have a sampler, right? And so, when you hear Good Times on Sugar Hill Gang, it's not a sample. There's a band playing Good Times in the background, and I think that's something that sometimes we don't, our brain goes back in time and says, oh, they must have been sampling that. And even if you look up like what was the first sample used in hip hop culture, it'll pull up Rapper's Delight, but it's not a sample. It's what we would call today an interpolation. But it's actually a band playing that. And I think there were certain things you could do, like you could record a DJ's routine. So like you can kind of sample in that way, but a lot of times that's not what was actually happening. Is they were getting in musicians to perform these when they were doing albums. And so Run DMC's album is, I think, importantly, a break from that kind of practice of production, which probably made it a lot cheaper too, and the profit margin much better, because they didn't have to share it either with as many, people, or pay session musicians or whatever you would have to do, right, in order to make a song like that. So
No, all that's a good point. I didn't even I don't think I knew that about the pre-interpolation performance. So that's an important point to make. So yeah, I appreciate that.
yeah. So then you get side 2, and I think that's important to say too, right? Because people who heard this album, it would have either been an LP or a cassette. And so Sucker MCs is the end of side 1, which again, like there's no filler here, really. I mean, Hollis Crew is probably my least favorite of the first 5 songs, but it's still very listenable. And so then you flip it over, and side 2 starts up with It's Like That, which is their first single, which might be my favorite song on the album. I love the beat, and it's very simple. It's just the drums with like those like kind of horn stabs or whatever you would call those. Um, but and it's an interesting song too, because I think, again, like Hard Times, it has that a little bit of a social conscience to it. But the problem I have with it is it's like exactly the thing Marx critiques, right? Which is like, you're interpreting the world, but the point is to change it. And they're saying, no, it's like that, and that's the way it is. Like, like nothing you could do about it other than we have to make money, is essentially the way that what they push in that album, and so, or in that song. And so, particularly with your work around like black buying power and black capitalism too, Jared, like, I think it is a kind of proto, not proto, because other groups were doing this before that, but it is a sort of that we're in this place, everything's fucked up, but money is the thing to cure all your woes. Like,
I mean, they literally have a verse here where it says, "You should have gone to school. You could have learned a trade, but you laid in the bed where the bums have laid. Now all the time you're crying that you're underpaid. It's like that. That's the way it is." So they're literally saying, it's your fault. You could have gone to school, and gone to college like we did, and or learned a trade, but you're just a bum, and that's the way it is. So it's, yeah, I mean, it's again, for again, I can see how at that age, my generation would have been tricked into thinking this was some sort of socially conscious commentary, or they're speaking the truth for the young black youth, and they're pushing, whatever. But uh I really, we did need some progressive adult supervision to say, we appreciate what you all are trying to do, young people, but what we got was, and this is sort of that contradiction, what we got a lot was the black bourgeoisie saying, not that you're misrepresenting the politics, but you're misrepresenting the positiveness of our struggle. So that all that did was make our whole generation defensive and start, you know, not looking self-critically at all at what was happening. And here we are.
that's a good point. I mean, because there's this weird moment in Tougher Than Leather, the book, where Russell says that, I can't remember who I think he's trying to get Run-DMC signed at this point, right? Because we should say a little bit about that. They end up on Priority Records, which is very small at the time. It's owned by a couple of white folks, but it's not what it became. It's a small, like, independent label basically at the time. And and Run-DMC really actually is responsible, right, for making it largely what it does become. Um, but Russell's talking about trying to take their tape, because what they do is they record It's Like That and Sucker MCs as a demo, attic demo, low quality. Then it's good enough that they're like, okay, we need to go over to Green Street Studios. As I said before, Green Street Studios lets them cut it on the arm, basically says, like, we believe in this and believe in you well enough that we'll let you record it for free. And then we'll recoup those costs, when you sell records, basically. So they then create, single quality basically of it, and then they take that to all the labels, and everybody says no to them, except for eventually they get to Priority. But Russell has this commentary when he's talking about taking it to, like, black owned labels at the time, and he said something along the lines of, it's not surprising that the white labels passed on us, with their racism and everything else. He's like, but, and he calls the black record label, executives or managers or whatever, the people who are making these decisions within certain labels, um he calls them bourgeois, right? And he says that they're always trying to sign another Peebo Bryson, and that's all that they care about. And so I just say that because they talked in that period about exactly what you're talking about, Jared, about running up against both black radio, but also black folks that are in the industry who did not want to involve them or bring them into what they were doing. And it seems as though it's not so much of a risk. I mean, the way that Russell kind of says it, it's not that he's saying, and this is just his perspective told through Bill Adler, right? But it's not that they were afraid that it wouldn't work, right? It's really that they wanted no association with that type of music. So yeah.
No, that is it. It wasn't some business decision, which is often my point about all of this. It's, I think, almost never primarily a business decision. It was a political and ideological one. And they saw that it was becoming popular. And then they used to say it was just going to be a fad. It was going to pass. It wasn't going to last. And they were hoping for that in many ways, because now, in quite the contradiction, as an older man, I'm looking back and saying, I get it. The corrupted popular version is being used to justify anti-black policy and behavior in this country. But the appropriate approach would not have been a black bourgeois um, respectability politics approach. It would have been something more along the lines of political education. But we just got a lot of finger. And then there was also a lot of misrepresentation of the critique too. Even the bourgeois middle class critique was often misrepresented. So, but yeah. And I've in the minds of some, or just a handful of people, died on the Hill around defending C. Dolores Tucker, for instance. I think her argument was misrepresented and misunderstood by my generation, me included at the time. And she was not making some revolutionary argument. She was not, anything like that. But the argument she was making, similar to the one I just made, was right. That corporations are taking it over, they're destroying the popular version and using it to justify anti-black and anti-black youth policy. And she was absolutely right on that. Now, again, that message was corrupted, and her delivery of it wasn't perfect at the time. And then the political education levels of those of us of my generation who were defending hip hop wasn't sufficient. And then again, I think it's a perfect metaphor for the problem, that one of the most popular vocal outlets in defense of hip hop that would emerge was Source magazine, which was, of course, co-founded, at least in part, by white Harvard students. So it's like there were so many contradictions we were missing here about what was going on. And for a long time, people in my generation would point to the Source magazine as being, the real, outlet, or among the realest of the outlets. And but that foundation, but even that wasn't. It's like you're writing about defending the integrity and the freedom of a hip hop cultural expression in a very commercial magazine founded by whites at Harvard. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, it's just, oh my God. Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, I appreciated this comment too. The fears were genuine given what we've gotten mainstream
Yeah.
wise, but to act like there wasn't thought provoking content is still disingenuous. And absolutely, I mean, any conversation about this album, we have to also compare like with other mainstream products of this era, right? And I think that there is, and the next song actually works well into. Did you have anything else you want to say on It's Like That, those?
It's so outside of the where this conversation is currently, but just the technical piece of like tapes, like switching the side and sort of the excitement of what that meant. I remember having like a whole feeling about it. And then also when it messed up, how fearful you were of like, oh shit, why? Now I had to find the pencil to like redo the tape. And the appreciation of the physical media of these things was just always so wild to me. I remember too, like you could tape over the corners to prevent it from ever being recorded over, because that was like we accidentally always did that when like something came on and you wanted to record something new. You had to make sure if you wanted something to not be recorded over, you had to do that. And just I'm not sure people appreciate some of the the loss of some of this physical stuff, because I think it's important, because it's even just this sound wise, it's just so much better than some of the stuff we have today. But I just remember like when you said that side too, I was like, oh yeah, the excitement of what that looked like for albums was always a huge thing back in those days.
Yeah, man. I have so much. I mean, I split my finger open last night, like trying to pull out like, my old CD album covers and stuff like that, trying to find stuff. But I still have a ton of, people think I have a lot of books. I have a lot of records and CDs and stuff like that. And I do love physical media, and I miss it's not like because I still have it, but my relationship to it has changed a lot, right? Because I'm now mostly listening on streaming services or, stuff like that. And um it was the whole like the process, like going to the record stores that we went to, talking to people about albums that came out in those spaces, what came out this week, what are you listening to? Like the whole social aspect of that, I think can't be understated too. And also, again, not to make it like some revolutionary thing, but like also to what we plugged into as young people around this stuff is like it was just something to come together with people about, to have conversations. And I feel like, I don't know what that looks like for young folks nowadays. Like I don't want to try to, because I really my son listens to music, but I don't really know what he's listening to because it's all in his headphones. And like, and I don't think that he's having a lot of conversations with other people about the music that he's listening to, even his friends, right? And I think that that's kind of one of the things that has shifted with the digital thing, is it's like much more of an individual thing. Like I've even seen stuff where people go to parties and everybody wears their headphones and dances to like different music and stuff like that. Like, uh, so it's just, and parties. I mean, I worked a place where they used to derive a lot of its income from throwing parties for teenagers, basically, and then using that to funnel into after school programs and stuff like that. And there became a point where they could no longer do that because kids no longer wanted to get together and dance. And that was just wild for me to hear, because I was like, that was the pinnacle, right, of like what we wanted to do in that
My
period,
daughter's parties, there's that we've hosted a couple for them. They don't dance. The most they do is gather, like when their favorite song, when that Meek Mill song Dreams comes on, Dreams and Nightmares come on, they all start, singing the whatever. All they do is gather in the middle of what would be the dance floor, and they're just, I mean, at most they're just bouncing around together, but they're not, there's no real dancing. They're just all like, it's like after a team wins the big game and they're, high-fiving in the middle of the field. It's got more of that vibe than what we would have. And I remember so I don't know, exactly how pervasive that is, but I have noticed it at all of the events that we've either hosted or been to for our daughters. That seems to be the way things go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And one more point on tapes. I mean, so they did DMC talked about when this album, I think it was actually when King of Rock, I don't remember, but one of the albums came out. He's like, we wanted to have the best tape, right? Emphasizing the medium. And also the thing, and this connects a lot to your work, Jared, too, around mixtapes and so on. Like that part of that was that a lot of the tapes back then were not put out by record companies. Right, they were recordings, or I mean, sometimes they were mixtapes, but also, especially in that late 70s, early 80s era, they were recordings of parties, or live performances or battles that happened, basically in the streets, right, by people on tape, and so often using like not even like cassette tapes, but like what would be the name for that? But like basically these recorders that people had. I used to have one. Like what I'm
Yeah, I think I
blanking on
know
the
what you're
techno.
talking about, but
Like journalists would use them back
yeah,
then too. Like it's basically the modern version is there's like Zoom recorders, but there was a Tascam, is that it? Like, that this kind of technology, where
I
it
keep
had
wanting to say
basically
DAT tapes, but I don't
DAT
know.
maybe well,
But
DAT
I'm
I think is
probably
what they actually stored the recording
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
Anyway,
know. Yeah.
yeah,
Or
like
they
live
might make
recorders.
one recording that would be used for a radio, like a lower commercial or alternative radio or college maybe even or something, but not for popular distribution or sales or anything like that. There might be like somebody might make something that could be playable um somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then obviously the mixtape, right?
Yeah.
Which also like to what you were talking about too, those of like putting, covering over the tops and things like this of like, people making recordings of radio shows too, right? And like those being circulated, which I think a lot of that is, yeah, I mean, the eras we have to remember how little of this stuff was actually happening on the radio. But college radio, to your point, Jared, also played a different role, connected also to like the college party scene and stuff like that. And that was really where, as I said, Russell figured out he could make his money was like connecting in with the parties, the college students who had money, who could pay to go to parties, and all of this, and how to connect in kind of the rock audience and the hip hop audience and all of that. um all right, so then Wake Up. So this is probably, I mean, this a very interesting song. um the lyrics of it probably are the most interesting to me from kind of a political perspective, but it's just a dream, right? You got to wake up. So, I mean, there's a whole description of really a kind of ideal society, right? A vision of a whole world working as a team, no tanks, no atomic bombs. Um, Between all countries, there were good relations. There was finally a meaning for United Nations. um, Everybody had an occupation, meaning a job, right? Um, Everybody worked together to fight starvation. So there's all of this. Everyone was treated on an equal basis, no matter what colors, religions, or races. So like it goes on
See,
and
they were
on, right?
advocating for communism. They were revolutionaries.
It's the most communist pilled of the
It is. It really is.
of
Except
the
that they call it a dream, and unless you want to argue that was some attempt at uh, undermining the censors, or circumventing, the censors. But it kind of goes back to that earlier point about this is ultimately your fault. What was wait? Oh, we are the
We are
world,
the
right?
world. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it it reminds me a lot of John Lennon's song Imagine, right?
imagine,
Like it's
yeah,
it's a very similar kind of vibe where you paint this utopian society, what Robin D.G. Kelly would call freedom dreams, right? And but
but no
again, like
politics to get there.
no politics to get there, and it was all a dream, is just a dream, and what they're telling you to do is wake up.
Right. Yeah, right. Because it's not that's the point I wanted to make about that. It's not saying right, and I wouldn't want people to think because of the title and like me a bad memory that they're saying like it's not like an anthemic wake up. It's not even Sam Jackson in Do the Right Thing screaming in the camera from the radio station. Wake up. It's not that. It's saying wake up and come back to the reality of your doom where it's like that and it's just the way it is. Oh man. But I'm sure back then I was like, yeah, man.
Well, and I mean, to be fair, like that's part of what I don't know. I mean, I go back and forth on these things, but I think it does matter to what we got out of it, to some extent, right? And thinking that that there is a vision sort of presented within the song. And you could read Wake Up one of two ways, right? You could read Wake Up as, like you said, like, we need to wake up and make this happen. Although again, there's no plan, no strategy, no suggestion of what that would take or what kind of organizations or anything like that, right? Which is, I think, a huge problem. But then there's the other read of it of just, yeah, like you said, like wake up. This is not what we live in. Like you had a dream. And I think I could be misremembering, but I think that they actually said that in the creation of it, that that was their intention, was to say like, this is just a dream. Like, understand that. Like we don't live in this world.
When I went back to re-listen to it uh this week, I mean, that's how I heard it. I heard it as them just saying again, not wake up to do something about it or wake up to this reality. It was like not in a rebel against it. It was saying I'm depicting this fantasy land, but now I'm waking you back up because this isn't happening. And it's just sort of again the vibe I took from it was I just need you to be awake to realize how bad it is and just sort of leave it at that. Just be awake and see how bad it is. Not awake in the woke way we would say that or have heard it initially today. It was just literally being awake and not in the dream world of a world that can't be. Or I'm not even advocate. It's not even seemingly to advocate that we get there. It's just saying it'd be nice,
Yeah.
but never mind.
And I think this is a good point from Paul again. If you
That
listen
is
back,
a
that
good
shit
point.
dovetailed with the just say no drug war propaganda and stuff like that. I mean, this is a consistent thread for Run, particularly, and also for Russell Simmons, of a kind of um, hand wringing about where the culture is going, sort of thing, and what I mean. It's interesting on some level because I find it quite like full of contradictions, right? Because this album is created in part to show a particular kind of hard aesthetic in contrast with the disco R&B kind of inflected thing. It is they talk about how they wanted it to have a street feel to it and all of that, and it becomes, when you go back and you listen to Snoop or you listen to Dr. Dre or like other artists who become, the quote unquote gangster rap kind of thing. Run DMC is so important to them in terms of them then seeing the image and thinking, yeah, this can be a hard thing too. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to dress up like Prince and like, this kind of, this is the way that they would say it often. And I think that there's obviously a lot of different artists that, Russell promotes and, does that are more, I guess, involved in street culture or whatever than Run DMC actually was. But there's always just this contradiction of them kind of browbeating people about, being too involved in like the whatever the criminal or the foolishness or however they would kind of paint it. Um and not any real reflection on their own role in, that when you promote certain images, that also that's what we see as kids too, and that's what we kind of think of as cool, and that they played a role obviously in getting from one place to another in certain ways. Yeah, but you do get a lot of that with, I mean, Run was recently asked about Russell's like sexual assault allegations within the last whatever years, and he said, "I don't want to talk about that. That's negativity. I'm only here for positivity." And it was like,
Hey, listen, I think somebody mentioned something of it in the chat, but I admit I watched at least, I don't know if there were multiple seasons, but I at least watched one season of that Run's House or whatever. And he
Me
would
too.
do those bathtub, thoughts at the end of the show or whatever, that I was just, but it would be interesting to like even run through, just those concluding segments because as I remember them, they were always filled with that kind of, oh man, we just got to rise above the negativity. And it was a whole bunch of that, self-help, logic and, the candles around the tub and, all, we just gotta Calgon take me away or whatever, or, that was the whole, and it does seem like a logical extension of even what they were doing in the art here, in the music from the first album. It's like that, but
Yeah. Well, that is a thing. I mean, for both Russell and Run in particular, there is, I mean, Run obviously becomes a reverend, right? But there is the whole very much a self-help, and they a lot of books that they've done about their kind of like, spiritual wellness, all this kind of stuff, like kind of, dovetails a little bit with like what's that guy's name? Like Steve Harvey kind of,
oh wow.
discourse and stuff like that, and
So
and
yeah,
so
he doesn't want to talk about the negativity of the discussion of his brother's actions, but the actions themselves are not seen as negative, and it's the discussion of the actions that are too negative for him to. And I don't want to bring up, stay out of that negative space.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched the one interview that Russell did about all of it, and like, I mean, he treats it as though he's like, it's the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And it's like the allegations are the
Yeah.
most traumatic thing that's ever
No, it's like,
happened to
remember
me
when
in
George
my
Bush
life,
said Kanye West calling him racist was the worst thing that ever happened to him during his administration? It's like, oh, really? Nothing else that you could think of. All those 8 years, there's not one thing else that was worse than Kanye saying you were racist or didn't like black people. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Of all, you sure? There's not one other event. I mean, it's bizarre, man.
Yeah. And I do think, I mean, DMC is interesting here because I mean, obviously he loses his voice, right? And so he can't continue really to make music like he used to, and this is like quite devastating for him. He also goes through this thing where he realizes that he was adopted and he never knew that, right? And all
Oh,
of
that's
this,
right. That's
um,
right.
but he really does distance himself from both of them. And I guess I didn't find the whole source of it, but I found some discussion of he was asked about it, and he gave an answer that I guess Russell somewhat used to defend himself, which was DMC said something along the lines of like, we need a broader like it's a bigger problem than just Russell, right? Which I actually, of course I think would agree with that all that like this is, a system and a set of behaviors and all that are much more pervasive. And obviously, if anything, I mean, the Me Too movement, Samantha Yusuf's conversations on like what it was like to work at Disney and all like these industries, right, are rampant with Russell Simmonses and people like that. And, a lot of them are white, of course, right, as this movement has shown. But I think that I also think there's real limits to what the Me Too movement, brought about in terms of actually addressing the underlying conditions of that kind of violence. But I think it was an important intervention nonetheless. And so, Darryl was kind of trying to say that, and I guess Russell took it as a like, oh, well, he's saying it's not really my problem. It's like a broader cultural thing, which is sort of what Russell uses to defend himself, which is to say, it was different back then and we didn't behave, you can't judge that era by the standards of today. Which to some extent I think is correct, but it's not correct necessarily in a good way. Like it's not like we should say, oh, it was it was like, no, it was like deeply fucked up back then, and that fucked upness was like really widespread. And
It's
he was
also
a
not like,
particularly
and I mean, it's not like we didn't have. I mean, I know there weren't the Me Too, social media, whatever back then, but it's not like there were nobody back then saying don't beat women, don't abuse
100%.
women. You know what I mean? It's not like we were in some not, no disrespect to the earliest humans, but it's not like we were just crawling out of some cave somewhere and just figuring out that, oh, you know what, I probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So
No,
I don't want
totally.
to, because they say the same thing about slavery too. Sometimes, like they still, it's like, no, there were even whites back then that were saying, you know what, we probably shouldn't be doing this shit. But so like, yeah, yeah. No, it was all good. We were just all back then.
Yeah. And then there were like, I mean, very interestingly, like I watched a Breakfast Club interview where they were talking about it
Oh
after
boy,
it happened, like that crew. And what's the guy's name? Rosenberg?
yeah,
I think he was the one who said, come on, we all knew this. Like, which I think is that's the piece, is it's sort of like Russell was also known by everybody within the hip hop community
yeah.
as somebody who
Apparently,
was just going around like sexually assaulting people, and they just all kind of looked the other way, right, for decades while it went on. And so, yeah, anyways, very messed up stuff. But I do find DMC, of the three of them in particular, I mean, Jay, obviously, rest in peace, is not around to talk about this stuff. But I find DMC to be the most kind of interesting and at least like a little bit critical and introspective, whereas I find both Russell and Run to be totally just like, yeah, I'm going into my spiritual wellness space and,
oh no, I
don't
think
mess up
they
my
would.
vibes.
Yeah, no, I think. Well, I see them both as grifters, and maybe if there's a paradoxical positive to DMC losing his ability to stay in the limelight, it forced him to step back and be like, this is some bullshit. And maybe just be a little more real. But yeah, whenever for the longest time, whenever I see Russell or Run, I just do the proverbial, put my hand on my wallet, start guarding my pockets. Like, I just feel like somebody, you know, And Paul, no, I don't know Peter. I don't know what that's, I don't appreciate that. And I don't appreciate the suggestion that I would have to know Rosenberg. I don't know what you're trying to insinuate.
All right, so the last two songs there are 30 Days and Jay's Game. I like 30 Days a lot. I don't know. Is there anything either of you want to say about those two records? Those
I didn't know, but yeah.
right on. Couple other so there's some good comments in the chat. Let me see if there was anything else that I wanted to talk about within. I think we got to a lot of this stuff. Yeah, we really did. This has been great. Thanks a lot for doing this with us, Jared.
No, for me, no, thank you. This is cathartic and
All right.
fun.
So let's go through the comments. I start a few. So I used to hang out with an Algerian friend from Paris who knew so much hip hop, and I was confused. She said Paris DJs would fly to New York, pick up mixtapes, and play in the nightclubs the next day. I mean, there's a
I
really
believe that,
interesting, there's a really interesting history of, the way that hip hop like spread and was still supported within Europe. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a little bit strange always to me, but like a lot of acts, a lot of especially like old school acts, were able to continue to support themselves financially in years when like they no longer really could tour or do big shows in the United States, but Europe would have festivals or tours or whatever. And,
Mhm.
there's an interesting whole history and ecosystem. And Tume would actually be a good person to talk about this because I think he actually toured in Europe with his music at one point. But yeah, that's a a
I've
whole different.
always I have an incomplete kind of stupid theory about this, but uh part of it based in I think the historical reality that's a pattern though. That follows a pattern of black artistry out of this country that jazz musicians tour in Europe and never can get a venue here in the United States.
Yeah.
Uh Particularly progressive rappers get audiences overseas. The Bob Marley and Jimi Hendrix argument was the same, that we want black audiences, we can't reach them in the United States. And then you go overseas and they have huge fan bases from the diaspora and elsewhere. There is and so and I don't know the way my mind works, without just studying and being disciplined about it, is that I want to say it has something to do with some kind of fascination with those with the colonized, like the indirectly colonized. Like we didn't directly colonize and enslave that group, so we'll hold up their art in a way that those who directly did won't. And it's and then there's some, I don't know, some weird fascination with white America to want to both fall in love with and suppress what's produced here. I don't. It's just some silly thing I shouldn't even say outside of my head. But the first part I think is important. That what happened with hip hop is part of a pattern of artists finding a career outside of the United States that they can't find support for here. But
Yeah.
someone has probably figured that out better than I. I've always just thought it's got some.
Yeah, no, there's some interesting
I don't
stuff. I
know.
mean, like it makes me think also of like James Baldwin and Nina
Yeah.
Simone and Billie Holiday, but like there's also I think something too for black artists similarly to what you were talking about, kind of inverted of well, these aren't the people who directly colonize me here, and maybe the racism in Europe doesn't feel
Is
quite like the
Yeah.
racism does in
Good
Mississippi
point.
or whatever else,
Absolutely.
so like I think there's multiple dynamics there that that are at play, but yeah, it is an interesting interesting aspect of hip hop history, really.
And yet, while
Um,
standing outside this bar with some important to note, dark-skinned friends of mine, I certainly heard folks come out, and I heard Schwartz a couple times coming out. I was like, "Damn, we came all the way over here to get called niggas?" Like, damn. So it's like, but at the same time, no, I'm sure what you say there is absolutely right. That it's like, let me just get a different white and and any other kind of white will do. And yeah, anyway, yeah. I don't know. But
so
yeah.
mainstream narrative seems to always start with Sugar Hill Gang, but I see that as the start of overt corporate takeover
Yeah.
of rap, hip hop. I mean, I think this is one of the points that we wanted to get across to with this album. I mean, it is interesting in the way that in these early years, it is not as though major corporations are bending over backwards to get this music and um, produce it and get it out. Like the, a lot of these acts like make a 12-inch, right? Make a single, vinyl single. And then if that develop like such a like, whoa, that thing's selling like crazy, then the corporate interests become more interested because they're like, whoa, there's some money here to be made. Um, but I think that's important to say to some extent because it is not as though from like, especially if we're talking about white capital, it is not as though they're there from the very beginning to try to like figure out from this stuff what can we monetize. It's more that people like Russell Simmons are involved in figuring out what can we monetize from this, and then it becomes so commercially viable that then they're like, okay, now we want a piece of it.
Yeah.
And then it takes over. And as you said, like that, at some point when we do this series, I want to get into, the is it 96 when you get the 96 or
Telecommuni
98, the
Telecommunications
Telecommunications
Act.
Act.
Yeah, 96.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because that's really where we live in the afterlife of, and I think
Mhm.
it's important to remember that before that, it's not to paint it as some kind of like rosy utopian thing, but there was like a possibility of kind of small business and entrepreneurship
It
getting
was
to a hit and getting to a place where you could,
it was
yeah,
a
go ahead.
whole it really I mean, I a lot of people who have studied this have used that 96 point as a benchmark because I think it's legit to say that it was a sea change. And it's not just in terms of the money that is made and who gets it and who can set up it. It's that you were far more likely pre 96 to have people actually in communities, in spaces where music was being created, picking the music that would end up being played at the local radio or even television. Uh, and that made the possibility for all kinds of other music and art to be heard in ways that today I think it's worlds different. I think that had a huge impact. Um, but the point I wanted to so I want to make an inappropriate parallel here to make the point, but colonialism just colonialisms. Imperialism is just imperialisming. So when it isn't specifically prescribing exactly every single detail, it's just waiting. That's why that initial Matrix depicted metaphor I think was so successful. It's just out here scanning. Here's what's going on. All right, what's going on? All right, a little bit of thing. Oh, here's this thing called hip hop. And it's like, meh. And then as soon as and it's not, I think, that much different from how the United States interacted with Israel. This is the inappropriate parallel. It's like Jews, I put the 1948, whatever, go ahead, whatever. And then in 67, when they see, oh shit, they can actually defeat another military, or they're actually a player. Oh, now we're going to start pouring all this money into it and turning it into and beefing it up. And it's the kind of the same principle. It's like, oh, wait a minute. There's this hip hop thing happening. People showing us there's a way for us to monetize, manipulate. Because I'm admittedly more focused on the ideas. We can get them all out of that nationalist shit and all out of that Afrocentric and any form of leftist, because it was there. There were tracks, very early on with all kinds of politics in them. And we can, this isn't just a fad. Oh, and that's why, by the way, when I made that point earlier about Eric Sermon being with Cohen again for this AI initiative, I need to point out that it's, I think, 1993 when EPMD puts out the crossover, right? I think, and that was like the last gasp moment of hip hop's critical question that rock and roll had, even too, and failed, of maybe we shouldn't be doing commercials and shit. Like, and so Eric Sermon is in a track saying, we don't want this to keep your audience. I don't, keep all that shit. We're not crossing over. And here you are 50 years later, which is supposed to be seen to us as a victory, hugged up with Leo Cohen. So that's the point I think you're absolutely right to say it that way, that it's like, oh, wait, we can, all right, this is what you're doing. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting in the context too of the production of the music in this era, right? Like, they make this whole album basically like relatively on a shoestring without, I don't think, even Priority Records, which is just a couple of white dudes. Like, it's not,
Right.
this is not super wealthy. I think they started it with $34,000, which is like, yeah, that's a lot of money in that period, but we're not talking about, millions and millions of dollars, right? And so they can make this album, and there is, even within this, as we've talked about, we can have our critiques of it, but there is like social commentary and these other things that are coming up, and that's probably relatively unmediated. It's their own, ideological orientation at the time, etc., right? And but hey, that Rock Box single on MTV, like, we have something now. We can get Aerosmith in here, like, so yeah.
And again, it's the social consciousness. And again, we got to, just in case there's anybody younger than you, at least, watching this, who might not know, the video is an enormously important component to the development and success of any of these artists. And when you go back and watch that Rockbox video, which I encourage everybody to do, especially doing it without sound, which I think adds something, it's so clear that they're saying, yeah, you might get the album and hear some hard time shit and hear some other shit about poverty, and they might even do a song that's eerily communist. But they're very friendly and they hang out. The white kid is safe. You know what I mean? He's not being dragged off in an alley. He's safe. He's happy. The dancers are there. It's all good. And that's what I'm trying to say about the colonialism part. That's the whole point. This is as perfect a group as any to put money behind and promote, and because all of that would have been paid for as an advance by the record label. So you can't get it made, you can't get it onto the MTV playlist without executive ad supported corporate interests saying go ahead. And you know, here we are. It's great.
Who in the chat is old enough to get the Calgon reference? Flash it to the beat. The real version, the live one with Flash playing the beatbox, is a more authentic example of how early beat machines were being incorporated. I encourage folks to check that out. I mean, I think we probably didn't talk enough about it in this, but we're at 3 hours, so I won't go deep into it. But obviously, like the drum machine element in the 80s is really interesting, and it is this album is kind of in this, yeah, you said sea change earlier. Like there is a change going on in the mode of production, and it is, when we get to Marley Marl, we'll talk about like what happens when you figure out you can sample real drums, so then you don't have to play these kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but these electronic drum sounds, basically, that they had. Synthesizer drums really is what I guess you would say to people. But yeah, the Roland 808 and all of that was it was a huge aspect of this.
So yeah, I just wanted to echo quickly that point that we and I definitely have underemphasized the importance of the technological shifts in this, and I admit I didn't prepare enough to get exactly, again, the chronology. I don't remember exactly when things hit and when they become taken up by producers and brought in. But that is, so I just encourage folks at all interested who don't know already to follow up on that, because the technological shifts and the laws around intellectual property and sampling all play enormous roles in the shifts in the sound of rap music, and why today's music sounds the way it sounds. I don't think it's appreciated enough that is all. It's not just some authentically natural, hey, we decided we're gonna all do this, and it's all being impacted by European technology, US intellectual property right law, and so on and so forth. So it's fascinating.
The sampling thing still gets me pissed off when I think about like all of the incredible creativity that was potential that was there that is lost because of intellectual copyright law. And it impacts us even like part of the reason we're not showing you all of Rockbox, right, or whatever, right, is because they'll flag us with a DMCA violation or whatever. And so it's really unfortunate the ways that has impacted so much. But yeah, it'll be, I mean, I have I have a conversation on De La Soul coming out with Austin McCoy, who just wrote a book that's coming out soon on them, and Hanif Abdul-Rakib, that will get out closer to when that book is coming out. But I probably, obviously 3 Feet High and Rising is very important to discussing that history, and so we'll probably delve into it, with De La in particular.
Rest in peace, Dave. De La stakes is high. Maybe still, I said for a long time, was absolutely my absolutely singular favorite song ever, from the production to the lyrics to the it is so, they are, man. So I'm glad they're still making music. I'm glad. I didn't know this about the interview or the book coming out, so this is great news. And they were phenomenal live. They were phenomenal, and what they mean. And I know this is in part why you brought them up. What they mean to the history of this legal battle, never mind to music, is a lot. I mean, they're man.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
So this is DMC does go through, he said, I remember DMC giving all I did was drink 40s for like 2 years
Wow.
answer to an interview, which is a very specific trauma response for a guy in those years. Yeah, I mean, his interviews are interesting. Like I didn't get a chance to watch his whole Drink Champs episode, but I imagine that's interesting. He did struggle with alcoholism for a period, basically, and he partly, said it was in order. He was quite open that the person he was on record and on stage was a very different person from who he was. And so he said basically in order to get himself into that place, he had to drink. And and eventually as they're touring and everything else, he felt the sort of pressure to be in that mode kind of all the time. But there's other stuff. I mean, like again, he was adopted and he didn't know that until he's like 35 years old.
Yeah, that's
There's
got to be
so
crazy.
so there's a lot to him, and of all these people, I'm not saying like to endorse him or his politics or whatever, but I do think he's the more interesting of all of them to kind of engage with because he's a little bit more open and honest and interested in having, different kinds of conversations.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, future presidential candidate Stephen A.
Jeez.
Smith from this vein. I will say that also, as I was doing the research on Hollis Queens, one of the
He
other
said he
most
would win,
famous.
by the way. Sorry to interrupt you. Did
Yeah,
you know that Stephen A. Smith said I would win?
he might. But he is also from Hollis Queens. So
Right,
I
right,
just say
right,
that to
right.
say that
Yeah.
there's a lot of people, a lot of interesting figures historically from Hollis. And the other thing I think I did say that none of their parents were native New Yorkers, which is also kind of an interesting thing. So there's Baltimore, there's South Carolina, there's North Carolina, I think Florida, but I'm not sure the one who was from Florida was actually from Florida or just lived in Florida. But like, so most of the families are from the South and they move up as teenagers. So a lot of them, their parents moved up right after high school to New York. And they, unfortunately, in the stuff that I read, because it's not well written, they don't go into at all the context of why, right? What were they fleeing or what were they seeking to be a part of? Like, what were their political
Well, if
motivations, aspirations, or whatever? But
that's great migration time, right? That math lines up, right? If they would have been right, because Run is what 10 years older than me, right? He'd have been born in the early 60s, right?
yep.
So then his
Yeah,
parents, they would have migrated, what, in the 40s?
possibly, yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that,
it could be
it's
great migration, something, right? Yeah,
Yeah, it's
something
not
associated.
unfortunately again because it like Tougher Than Leather. I will say it's interesting. It's a terrible read, right? Like there's like the other stuff of like them talking about Russell Simmons being in a gang and being a warlord and like all of this kind of
Really?
stuff. Yeah, which is very apocryphal in my opinion, and like uh because
I mean,
also
what do I know?
Russell said I never was violent in my entire life, right? This was one of his quotes about the rape allegations, right? Um and but yeah, it's
Warlord
bad,
would
but
be a difficult role to have and
part
maintain
of what
that.
the part of what the PR guy is trying to do is also say like, that he's trying to like have these discussions about gang culture and violence, and it's like it's this white dude who has no idea like what he's
Mhm.
talking about. You know what I mean? Like he has no context for this at all, right? And so it's like again trying to present it really for a white audience of a book, right, about these folks. Um, so there's a lot of issues with it. But I do find it interesting just because it's a propaganda piece that's written in like 86, 80, 87, I think, and so it has
Mm.
like, it's more in line with how they wanted to present themselves at the time and the stories that they were telling about themselves at the time, which I think is more interesting than what Russell or Run would say in this moment about that because they'd have a different political orientation probably to all of it.
That's a good point.
Uh,
I forgot it was that old. Yeah.
yeah. I did not know that the kids are all listening to the same music in their headphones at the party, but that's equally weird to me, I will say. Like,
No, that was the one thing I meant to say earlier. Yeah, I happen to have heard about that, and that is a thing. They're all listening to the same thing in the headphones, but it's supposed to be a quiet party, so no one else hears it. And all I can say is I just don't get it. But I asked. There is some percent above zero that my daughters are not being fully honest with me about what they know. But I did ask them about whenever the discussion of parties and stuff. Like I would ask, when I was growing up in this same area, a lot of what we did was have field parties where you find just some high school field or wherever, and bring out a keg, and somebody had a boom box, and there's your party. And so when they were like, we didn't have anywhere to go, we didn't, and I did the whole old man thing. What do you mean? What do you need somewhere to go? Boom, bang. And they were like, nobody does that. They were like, nobody does that. And I at first I was like, they're just not telling me the truth. But when I saw the parties that they were having, and where stuff like this was happening, or they were just, again, not dancing, and everybody just kind of globs together in the middle of the dance floor for a song, I was like, I don't know, maybe I just don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just I'm just too old now. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Paul,
No, not that you being too old.
No, I'm talking about Paul and the country music being where he, at the field parties where, no, those were like, when I was, a teenager, those were like the blackest parties, at least out here, that you might find.
I just say, one of the things I do have a lot of nostalgia for is those parties when we went to school together. Like that was carrying around your 50-pound record crates to actually, and your mixer and everything, to actually have a real DJ'd party with hundreds of people. Like, it was
crowded.
Yeah, that's what's up.
That's one thing I appreciate about technology, is not having to carry around that stuff, because my back wouldn't last any of that stuff.
That's
but
right.
sorry for the dog. But the field party, or the headphones thing, is weird, because like one of the great things about dance music, or music generally, is like when you can feel it as like coming through speakers in a system, and like that's part of the wanting to dance. And I just don't get how kids, or I don't know, maybe they're not even kids anymore, but how some younger generations don't have that like affinity for. But I don't know, I'm also old. So
we are old. I mean, there's not that many of us that are interested in hearing us talk about an album that came out in 1984 with a single in 1983, and I recognize that too. Like, as I started to do this series, I was like, I mean, part of the reason to do it on a different platform is like, I don't want to tank our numbers over on millennials. Some people,
yeah, absolutely.
But it's fun, and I think it's like this. I look forward to doing this and talking about some of the more, the shifts within the music and the different eras and different places, even that artists come from and the music comes out of. And hopefully it's a different type of conversation than folks are used to around these things, where we can get more into all of the political stuff. And I guess, yeah, if there's anything that I should have probably added in context for folks, obviously there's a lot to talk about with the early 80s, and the late 70s, in terms of the contradictions of capitalism in the era, what the US government is engaged in, and all of those kind of things. And maybe in future conversations we'll try to put more of that up front. But obviously we've talked for quite a while, so I've really enjoyed this and had a great discussion. Jared, thank you for joining us.
No, anytime. Thanks for having me, Doze. It was nice meeting and building with you. This has been great. And just quickly, for those who do see this and want that 80s context, they should just go see your Imperial 80s series, which would be again, I think, a nice parallel for that broader political context of what the hell was going on when this album came out, for sure. But yeah, thank you. This has been great. I love it. Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you. Oh, go ahead. Doze, did you have something you want to say?
No, I just want to say thanks again. It was
Yeah.
I enjoyed listening to both of y'all. So to be involved in it is great.
Yeah, man. Always good. All right. Peace, everybody.